Welcome to the Training Stimulus podcast. Today we have an absolute cracker of an episode in store for you. We're joined by a very special guest, Mr. Gary Ward. I've been lucky enough to become friends with Gary out here in Bali, and it's an absolute pleasure picking his brains on all things movement, sport, and training. He's been in the industry 25 years and is most famous for his flow motion model, which maps human locomotion in more detail than any other model I have ever encountered. Gary has got a wealth and breadth of knowledge that spans not just movement and the foot, but he is now working with some elite athletes in the NBA, the MLB, and the NFL, which we talk about in this episode. It's a really great conversation. I loved it. I think we could have done another 3 hours, to be honest, but I won't say any more in the intro as the podcast is already long enough. I hope you guys enjoy it as much as I did. Let's get into it. Gary.
Ashley.
Hello, how are you?
I'm really good, thank you. Thanks for having me back.
My pleasure. Thank you for coming. And we've got a bit of a better setup today. Not so many Bali dogs barking in the background.
Yeah, missing a pool.
Missing a pool, that's true. That's true. What's been going on in the last, I think it's actually nearly 2 years to the day.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, wow, that makes sense. So you've been here for?
About 2 years.
About 2 years. Yeah. Well, I think I've moved house 5 times. Yeah. And actually probably quite a lot's changed. So 2 years ago, I was very much enjoying Bali.
Oh, okay.
Not that I'm not enjoying Bali now, but things are so much busier.
Yeah.
And therefore, your time is precious, so you have to you manage things differently. Kids are a bit older, different focuses, but my work seems to have just taken. It was very much focused online, so we've been working at getting live courses going again. Mm-hmm. I've been traveling to the US quite a lot. Got new partners over there that I'm really excited about working with. Other projects, filming, manual writing, mentorships. It's full, all in the name of spreading the good word and helping people with their bodies and the world understand a little bit better. So yeah, it's taken up a lot of time, and not complaining. I absolutely love it. I'd still kind of preface everything we're going to talk about and anything that you've heard before on our previous podcast is that after 25 years, I'm still constantly fascinated by what the body's capable of and the messages that it gives us if we're willing to look and listen and understand through our assessment processes. And it's constantly mind-blowing. I have new mind-blowing moments on a regular basis, so it keeps me fresh.
Awesome. Yeah, and we're looking forward to hearing a lot of those mind-blowing moments. I think something people are always curious to hear from someone like you, given you know so much about movement and training, is what do you do personally? Not that it's going to be a template for somebody to copy, but I think everyone's curious to know.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting. I don't really get asked that question very, very often. I guess let's preface this with I've been, in inverted commas, an athlete kind of my whole life. So I guess that story is from, people say that you're good at anything type sport, a bit like yourself probably, not quite as good at you at some sports. But I played football or soccer for most of my youth, but also cricket, tennis, would win swimming galas and swim events and played squash. And I'm just, if it was, we could play basketball or, whatever, just anything went. It was a natural tendency. But my kind of journey was rocked and rolled by injuries. So I stopped playing football because I got to the point where I could virtually not walk on a pitch without rolling my ankle anymore. So I stopped, and the solution to that was to whack it in a ski boot because they don't move very much. But because I loved skiing and I went into that realm, spent a lot of time there, but I ended up competing in free ride events and freestyle events, but never pro level, always amateur enthusiast, semi pro level with the football, but just couldn't stop. It was, you'd spend all week looking forward to the event or whatever. I see that in my son now as well. Like, it's so focused on the next event. So football, skiing, then became kind of climbing. I had a massive obsession with golf. We played golf the other day. Yeah. Again, I lost to you. But all of these sports, they're just always there. And so now I'm 49 years old, 50 this year, and still playing. But there was a time when I thought to myself, there's no future in my body because it was so destroyed. So much pain. A lot of people, I've started sharing this story. I don't think I really wanted to before, but the discomforts and the pain that I had in my body was insane, and was one of those who was told, I don't know what to do with you anymore. I don't really know how to help you. So I figured it was like I've got to kind of help myself here, and that was a big part of my own movement journey and understanding. So now it's a matter of keeping my body in that place. I have significant kind of structural injuries, missing medial meniscus on the left knee, the ankle sprains left with virtually nothing to support it, right, other than my own anatomical awareness, I guess. Like the retinaculum around my right ankle just got destroyed. So there's, even now it'll roll if I get it wrong. So I look after that. I look after my knee. I broke through my jaw, which massively affected my neck. Dislocated a shoulder. So all these things like come together to form who I am today. Yeah. And I often talk about having a default body position, and that default position is when, if things aren't going well, or let's say I get ill or something like that, and then your body just kind of goes towards its default safe space, somewhere it knows how to manage the injuries, but they're not necessarily that's not necessarily the best place for me to jump on a court and run around for an hour and a half. Yeah. So a lot of it is self-care through the movement, but the movement work that I do is massive impact on muscle tissue and surrounding tissues and integrity as well. So that becomes a big part of my routine. Is to make sure that everything's thriving as well as it can, and then on that base, which I think we're going to talk about this base layer of actually having access to my anatomy. Then I can load it, then I can train. So I'll go in a gym and do movements, everything from kind of old school weightlifting stuff to calisthenic-y type practices. And then I spend a lot of time on the climbing wall with my son. That's a huge workout, especially trying to keep up with him. and then I guess it's things like paddle and I quit surfing. That was just too much for me. I just couldn't handle that. Yeah, it's a brutal sport. So in a nutshell, that's it. Gym-based stuff, sporting activities, and traveling around the world climbing with Kai.
Awesome. Yeah.
Keeps me fit and strong.
Good. Yeah, definitely does. And when you describe staying on top of your injury history, essentially,
yeah,
how does that look on a more granular level? Like in a week, how many times are you doing mechanics work on yourself versus going to the gym versus playing a sport in like a typical week? I think I know I don't want to give people something really prescriptive that they should do.
Oh no.
But I think,
but
how
then
does that look for you, considering
what they should do has got to be relevant to them, right?
Yes.
And I guess where we've all grown up in a kind of like go to the gym Monday, Wednesday, Friday, do
push-pull legs.
Yeah. When I worked at LA Fitness all those years ago, a guy, his name was Ashley, he was kind of in charge of the fitness team, and you'd walk in the gym and he'd look at you and he'd be like, fingers and toes today, Gary? Elbows and knees. That was the joke. And then, of course, it was the 3 sets of 10. And for me, honestly, I do my movements most days. There obviously I miss days if the schedule's too much, but most days if I'm in the gym going to climb or I'm going to play paddle, I will 100% make sure that I'm ready for it in my body, not just turn up and run around. I I know what I do works and is effective and puts me in a good place, so that when I actually hit the ground running, if you like, I've got access to all of my movement resources and not just some of them. Yeah. So if I go in the gym, there's always prep beforehand, and when I'm climbing, there's always prep beforehand and warm up and stuff like that. And then cool down is the same. I literally making sure that I can move my joints. So my medial meniscus, the surgery was to a big bucket tear, so they removed about 60 to 80% of it. Wow. And the impact of that is that the medial femoral head will just sink into that space, which is not a healthy place for a knee to live. But if everything's okay, then I can reorganize that into a place where that's not happening, and the muscles and the ligaments and stuff will hold it in place. But if I don't do it for long enough, it will slowly revert to that, and then I'll notice, so I know the symptoms that kind of come alongside that. And so I just stay on top of it because I don't want to have to regress. And I think a lot of my 20 years ago, the idea was like, what the hell am I going to be like in my 50s, I would have thought then, and that's next year, right? So, but I don't have a fear around that anymore. I don't even have a fear around having a pain in my body, because I know that I'll just figure it out, and that's nice. Yeah. But 20 years ago, it was a huge panic space. So again, I'd love to be able to encourage people to be able to find that spot for themselves, because then you no longer have a fear about, oh, maybe that's a disc. Like, I've had disc problems. And it's just have to take the pressure off the thing that's pinching the disc, and that comes through movement and understanding and knowing all of the obstacles in your body that you're moving around. So it sounds like a lot. When I do my own kind of, it can be 5 to 10 minutes. It's not like I put aside an hour and a half a day for that. But it's constant reminder to the nervous system of where I want to be, where I want to hold myself.
That's really cool. Yeah, I think practicing what you preach is a big part of, being good at anything, but having a good why as well. I think, because you're so sporty and you love your sports, there's a very obvious business case for the small investment of time that you're making in your mechanics. Yeah, and I think,
the small and often, the little and often is just a constant, like I just said, a constant reminder to the system, rather than once a week or, I'm feeling a bit of discomfort, maybe I'll do those movements again. It's quite far removed. The little and often, those small incremental additions just add up to big understanding, self-appreciation, and
definitely. Yeah. And what did you call it? Your default position, your default shape that your body goes into. I think it's a really useful framework for people to understand how and why we do things the way we do. Is your body will always gravitate towards that because of your injury history, because of your sporting history. Yeah. So you need those constant reminders to stop the gravitational pull towards that shape, which causes the negative
We're all
symptoms.
In it. Yeah. We're all in it. Even so, when we assess somebody, we'll take their resting posture and then look at how they can move inside their resting posture using dynamic assessment, simply to assess their rotation in their thorax or lateral flexion or hip abduction, and try and get a read on that. And I talk about being centered as your optimal space, and from center there's this ability to move in all dimensions, all 3 dimensions, towards both end ranges in all of those dimensions at every joint. That's how you find center. And because most people, if they were to run through a quick check of whether they can hike the left pelvis or the right pelvis, we'll find that one's easier. And so by virtue of that, they're one side of that pendulum and dominant on that side. And then you can see a sequence of events that plays out. So the lateral flexion in the spine will be easier one way than the other. In the neck will be easier, but that means that the rotation one way will be easier than the other. So if you were to do a binary check of every joint in your body, which in each dimension does it go left or right, and it favors one, and you put a yes tick and a no cross, or a check and a cross, all of a sudden you'll find you're only good at 50% of your movements.
Yeah.
But if you can only go one way, not the other, then your movement in general is compromised anyway. So even the tick or check, to say both now because there are a lot of American audience, it kind of just means that your movement is compromised. So the more imbalances you have in each of the systems, which could be coming from one imbalance, one surgery, then your whole body is now in what I call your perception of center. And so what that means is that if you, as a listener, were to stand up now and be in your relaxed body, that would be your perception of center. It's not your brain going, oh, you're not centered. This is the most efficient and effortless place for me to be right now, based on all of the potential and capacity that I have in my structure. Which will probably be a result of all the things that you've done to yourself in the previous X years. And so we are a version of our own story. And that's why everybody should have their own understanding of what they need to do rather than follow a prescribed system format, like we said. So that perception of center is probably your default place. It's a place that your brain has long learned is a safe place for it to be, a place that it understands how to operate in. And the sad bit about this is that this place could be your place that's causing you all the problems, because what you've done is you've changed the tension and compression relationships that happen in your body. And to quickly explain that is if you have a lean to the right, your vertebrae are compressing on the right-hand side. I touched the mic, sorry. A compression then is where the vertebrae are closing. So you have compression in the system. And that would effectively lead to shortening of tissue or inactivity of tissue. And on the opposite side of that, you have the joints opening, which is pulling stretch, if you like, into the tissue. And that's what we call tension. And so we all have tension-compression relationships in our system. And so the more tension, the more uncomfortable it can be perceived. The more compression, the more uncomfortable it can be perceived. Now, that doesn't mean that everywhere where we have tension and compression is painful, but there are places that kind of it's just too much, or that's the place where it lets us know what the problem is. And that can be our comfortable place, the place that we've earned the right to be based on our history again, but it's because I'm avoiding or moving around problems that I've got in my body. And at that point we go, I don't feel great, I better go to the gym. Right.
Stretch it off.
And now we start stretching and strengthening, but without that kind of dialing into what it is that I'm missing in my specific movements, then we're just getting stronger in our default position. And what does that lead to? I used to marvel when I was a personal trainer back in LA Fitness back in the day. I did that for 18 months before kind of basically being extracted into a world of teaching. Can you teach us what you're seeing, what you're talking about? But I used to marvel at the fact that people would constantly pay their trainer week in, week out to train them. And the more weeks they were together, the more strapping they would have on their wrists, elbows, knees. But I don't want to say it was the trainer's fault, but the trainer's doing good for them without realizing that the more they train without actually understanding what's going on in their body, the more issues they were starting to come up with. But they would strap themselves up and go training because it's good for me.
Yeah, doubling down on your suboptimal mechanics. Yeah. Essentially compounding it.
Yeah.
Lots of questions popped up as you went through that. So posture is one, but I actually want to start with the compression, tension relationships, because it's not that it's always bad, and there is well, maybe this is the question, is there a Goldilocks amount where if somebody plays a specific sport, they are adaptive and helpful, and it's beyond that point? There's going to be an inflection point where, say, we're going to get into this later, say somebody has a sport, say basketball, sorry, not basketball, baseball, where that side bend is useful for their sport, but in extreme circumstances it starts causing them problems. The goal isn't to get them back to completely neutral where the left side bend is the same as the right side bend. They still need to be right side bent to be effective in their sport. How do you make a judgment call on the right amount for that specific relationship?
So So obviously, just to bring it up, right-handed batters in baseball all seem so far to have as lateral flexion to the right, and all left-handed batters seem to have a lateral flexion to the left. I'm going to go back to a time when a physiotherapist at a leading football club in England told me that I not allowed to touch a certain outstanding Premier League footballer because the way he's set up is the reason he plays the way he is. And I just wanted to call bullshit. I know that's the reason why he's so injured. And actually, that if we change those mechanics, we are not going to change the way he plays, because the way I want to work and influence mechanics is on an unconscious level, not a conscious level. So if you think that we're going to change the person's resting position of a pelvis consciously, you're way off the mark. You can't do that. Mm-hmm. Has to be done unconsciously. It has to be done where the brain perceives the value of the change in pelvis to be of more value than the previous position. Yeah. So now we're talking about complete intangibles in anatomical terms. The word value probably never said on a physical therapy degree, right? Yeah. But we have to change the way we perceive ourselves for it to be of use. I always say, if you want to move someone away from the default position, if you do work and it doesn't change, it's not that the work was executed badly, it's that it just wasn't the right thing to do. It didn't add enough value. Yeah. So you could teach somebody to change the way they hold their position, but if you don't change the cause of that position, they'll just revert back to their default. So that's the part of the trick, is to try and go, okay, what's the cause? Why is it doing this? Why is it changing? So I've got two conversations going on in the back of my mind, but back to the baseball people. I would completely, if we're looking at the person and he's got discomfort, let's say he leans to the right and has discomfort in his right low back, as a right-handed batsman, we need to create space for that back to not have discomfort. So as a solution, we can't say stop batting, right? Yeah. We have to actually introduce to him the opposite. We have to say, we do need to teach you how to left laterally flex because you're stuck in this position. Okay. Do need to teach you to take your pelvis to the right to create space with the lateral flexion to the left. And then we might find that there's a reluctance to bear weight in the right leg, or there's an injury history that's preventing all of that. So you have to go into the causative element. One cause, we could say, well, they've all got a pattern going on because they've been doing it for so long that they end up in this position, but they don't all have discomfort in that area. They have discomforts in other areas. Then we just have to work out what it is that's pointing to that. Okay. But there's always tension and compression, regardless of who you look at, whether it's little old lady who comes in for foot pain or an elite sports person. They all have tension and compression relationships going on. And then most syndromes or itises or labels that we place upon the body are basically us caught in a moment in time in our cycle, a movement that we got into but never able to get out of. And when we could say, oh, you've got hip compression, or you've got SIJ compression, or you've got plantar fasciitis, or you've got an inverted forefoot, or you've got suboccipital compression, right? or a protracted shoulder, rotator cuff limitations. Each one of those things I just said is a requirement in our movement. We need to be able to get into it and out of it in order to find a balance point between the two. But we find that everyone gets stuck in it. Why? That's the real part of the job for me. Because if we understand how they got into it, how their body adapted into that space and got a good reason for it, they have an intention to be there, we can start to unwind that. Because we change the way that they perceive their body to be. So with my knee, I've already mentioned, or my ankle, my knee would have happened because of my ankle. So all the ankle sprains happened before I did my knee. And when I was skiing, I did a jump, came down a bit heavy on something a little too flat. And instead of unconsciously putting weight on my injured ankle side, I put all my weight on my left side. So I ended up deep flexing and rotating and then pop, pop, pop. So the likelihood of it happening on my right knee was much, much less because I'm avoiding that side completely. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I have reasons to be the way I am in my body, but they're not necessarily positive for my future, but that's just how my brain understands how I need to be today. So the reality is, instead of balancing on a wobble board and writing my name in the sky with my ankle, if we could have reorganized the mechanics of my foot, I may never have injured my knee because I'd have been more happy to land equally on both feet.
Yeah.
I don't know for sure.
Yeah.
But that's a hypothesis that goes on, and that, by the way, has been playing out with everyone I've worked with for 20 years.
Got you. The other example that comes to mind for these sort of stuck in position athletes, say you're a long distance cyclist and you're in the aero position for hours on end. I think the concern those athletes might have is, if you're going to take me out of so much flexion, is it going to be more work for me to stay in flexion when I'm on the bike?
It's a genuine fear and concern for the athlete, isn't it?
Yeah.
Same with the footballer. If we change his pelvis, maybe he'll never be the same again. Again, I don't agree. I've got no reason to agree. All I've ever seen is performance outcome improvements by coming from a more balanced position. So the problem with being fixed in a position is that the range available in that position is massively compromised. You can't thrive in that place, and to overcome that limitation, you have to overuse other parts of your body. So it might work for the cycling, but if it's, what about longevity? What about health? What about, and I know athletes don't really give a shit about that in the moment, but they will one day. Yeah. And the reality is that if you have, I suppose this is where the term movement variability comes in, options for movement at all areas, then it's easier to go into your flexed position.
Okay.
I think just come away from that for a second and think about sitting posture. It's harder to sit up straight in a good textbook position than it is to be in the position you want to be. But if I sit, I'm thinking of Monica, who's one of our teachers, who was complimented on her posture by a chiropractor or something like that, and she said something like, I have a really good slouching routine, because when she is slouching, she's like lengthening all the tissues in her back, and that when they contract, she can stand up taller. And she was basically exploring like movement cogs and stuff like that from our perspective back when we first met. And I always liked that story because if I sit, oh, fuck it, I'll say it. We had the idea of sitting. So I sit with my pelvis posterior tilted, lumbar flexed, ribs forward, shoulders forward, head forward. I'm totally comfortable in that position, and most people probably are. But when they get up out of that position and they go for a piss, they're still stood in that position. Talking about a guy, and then they sit in the truck to drive, and they're still sat in that position. And then they get out and they go and eat some food. They're sat in that position. They go and lay in bed. They're still in that position, right? So they have no choice around their movement. So their one choice is no choice. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so if you then spend your time teaching the lumbars to flex and extend, the tilt pelvis to anterior posterior tilt, thorax to flex and extend, neck to flex and extend, and you do that in this nice sequence that we call cogs, done on the floor, done on the wall, upright in gravity, maintaining an on-axis position with the skull over the rib cage, over the pelvis, you create movement in every single vertebrae. And it's a movement that can take you 2 or 3 minutes, and is probably the most life-giving movement available on the planet, because it expands and contracts your diaphragm, pumps every organ in that part of your body, pelvic floor movements are happening, tilts in the pelvis influence femoral internal rotation, external rotation, which leads to pronation, supination movement in the bones, shoulders coming back, scaps going up and down, neck flexing, extending. It's an insanely powerful movement. We call them cogs because of the opposition in the pelvis movement creates an opposition in the rib cage, which creates an opposition in the. So if you're doing that, and you have a sense of how to access both ends of that spectrum, and then you want to sit down in a slump, it's fine. You're probably going to sit less slumped than you did and still be comfortable. You're not going to be sat upright and locking it into just one of those choices, because that's also no choice. You've got fluidity and options in your body. Then you can get up and move out of that position and back into that position. That's really what movement is all about.
Yeah.
So people have problems because they're stuck in a position, and they get better. And 2 things happen from better when you put movement in. One is use less pain, and the other one is more performance. So in the athlete's level, we can be talking about both. And so when you come back to the baseball guy, all of a sudden, if he can be in an upright position and then move into the side bend and then out of it again, he'll actually generate more power, because by moving into it creates an elastic response in the tissues on the left, which are the contraction ones through the hit.
Yeah.
Whereas if I'm long and stuck in this position, they're always long, which is creating tension, and the opportunity to shorten is not there. Where am I getting the power from? Because they all got power. They're all hitting dingers over the bar, over the, I don't even know what they call that. All of a sudden, they're generating it from somewhere else, and that somewhere else is compensatory. So it's an effort, it's not effortless, and it's inefficient rather than efficient. So we want to create those environments in everyone where they've got more movement choice. And I said movement variability earlier, which I'm kind of at odds with, because I think people think that if we just do wild 3D movements and stand on a mat and tap different places, then I'm targeting I'm giving myself options in movement, which I am. But unless you, and this is where I get really anal, and it might be a bit too much for some people, but you can target specifically movement in every single joint. Whereas if you do random stand on one leg, reach to different points, or tapping a balloon or whatever, you will be moving around in your default position. And it's that we actually want to influence and change, which is what sets off this cascade of freedom in the system. So you can access more and more of your joints, more and more of your resources, which leads to more and more involvement of your tissue. So areas of your body that doesn't move well because the joints aren't moving well, the muscles actually have nothing to do. It doesn't matter how much strength and stretch you put into them. If it doesn't change that default that we're talking about, then the muscles, they don't have anything to do. They've got no reason to adapt, change, or get involved again.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's an amazing way of explaining it. And I think bringing it back to pain and performance, you explained really nicely how the performance improves in that because more joints are articulating, more tissues can lengthen and shorten, so more muscular recruitment comes into the movement. So that clearly explains why there's going to be more performance output, but it's also the same reason why there's less pain, because the workload is then shifted across more players in the team.
Distributed, exactly, yeah.
So I think that's a really nice audio visual for people to
just touching
picture
on that, but back to the cogs, and we were talking about sitting and slouching, but when you assess somebody's spinal movement, what the vast majority of time you're going to notice that they are moving in one or two segments of the spine, not using all of the vertebrae. So that in itself is a significant compression tension at a specific point, and that the idea that we've got 5 lumbars, 12 thoracic, 7 cervical, and distributing between all of them, which, by the way, can only happen if I'm on axis. So if my head is above my rib cage, over my pelvis, when I look at it from this perspective and this perspective, if I'm slightly to the left or slightly forward, I can't use all of my spine. I have to use some of it, and that's why people are rocking around using just some of their spine. So with really simple techniques to overcome that for people. Not that they're easy, but they are simple techniques.
Yeah, that's the next question I had was, I completely agree with you in that 3D movements, if you just broad brush slap them on somebody, that's better than a really limited set of movements. They're going to get more exposure to more positions, more joints opening and closing than they would if they were just doing purely sagittal movements. But the magic comes from getting motion in the joint that doesn't move.
Yes.
And what are obviously you need to assess which joints are not opening and closing, but say you find somebody in that situation where there's a stuck joint, how do you get their body to open and close that joint without their default patterns overriding? So we talked last time in the podcast, if you haven't listened to it, listen to it. I'll link it in the description below, about somebody who rotates without rotating. So they turn their whole body, but they don't actually achieve relative rotation between the vertebrae in their spine. How do you create a situation where that joint will articulate when it is avoided currently?
It's a great question. So we can actually touch on both of those, on that, and the both is the other thing I'm thinking about. What your question makes me think about. So I have a line. I've just said 3 things that didn't amount to anything. This is what goes on in here. I have a line which is that your body will move what it can and will not move what it can't. And it will do that in every movement task that you place upon it. So for the people who have movement through limited vertebrae, which is what I just described, because they're off axis, which means that their head is not on top of their ribcage, on top of their pelvis, because they're not resting in that position, they will find parts of their spine that they favour movement in and neglect other areas. And so that's their default. So they're just going to use their spine like that. And that creates a habit in the way they move, which creates a behaviour. And that behaviour is they're just going to repeat that, rinse and repeat every time. So every step they take, every lunge, every squat, every side bend, every whatever. So we can go to a yoga class or a Pilates class, and I love both of these things. This isn't about that, but you're going to put me on all fours and ask me to do cat-cow. Now, if you watch anyone do cat-cow, you will see that they do it by moving what they already can do and don't touch what they can't. So to a group, it might look like a bunch of people humping their spine and hollowing their spine and get rinse and repeat. But actually, the way they go down is by using the vertebrae that already extend. And the way they come up is by using the vertebrae that flex. So what they're not doing is flexing the vertebrae that extended them down. And what they're not doing is extending the vertebrae that flexed them up. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So they're just using what they can to go up and down in this fixed shape, barely touching the areas. So what's missing is the bit that is extending them can't flex. So we break that habit by going, I want you to flex from here. So now I'm in a very one-to-one personal space. Can't be done in a room full of 50 yoga people unless you've got 50 assistants, right? But I want you to flex from this point. You're tapping on, let's say you're tapping on L3. And it blows my mind that even a lay person who has got no anatomical understanding or ever really thought about their spine, all of a sudden they can begin to find, it takes a while, but they can begin to find that they can flex from this position they never thought of. And then when they're going to go and extend now, I want you to extend from this position. So you're actually homing in on and finding those areas and encouraging them to experience, to have a different experience in their movement, because then that all of a sudden changes things. People talk about the nervous system, and the nervous system, proprioceptive system's housed in the joints, in the tendons. And so once you put a flexion into an extended position, you're going to create new awareness of movement, which speaks immediately to the brain. And it's that's the piece where, when the brain perceives the value of that, oh, I no longer have to have this piece of my body extended because I can now flex it that I'd forgotten about because of whatever reason, but now I can have it. I'm going to use it if I like it. If I add value to it, I'm going to keep it. And so when you get people up out of these positions and they've been extending the flexed part, flexing the extended part, they all of a sudden have freedom in their movement, and their gait changes because they actually are more centered. And so that's an example of everything. So with your rotational thing, it's the difference between rotating your body left, touch the mic again. It's the difference between rotating your body left and rotating in a way where all of your vertebrae contribute together. So what we talked about on the last podcast at length was the idea that if my pelvis goes left and my rib cage goes left by the same amount, I didn't rotate my vertebrae at all. And if you watch the vast majority of rotational exercises on YouTube, you will critically see that that's what's happening. If you assess someone's ability to rotate their rib cage left and they go about 5 mil and then the pelvis starts being pulled with them, that spine stops rotating at 5 millimeters.
Yeah.
And if they rotate right but the pelvis stays still, even though they went that same amount left, you can see that they can't rotate their spine left, but they can right. That will play out in their gait cycle. That plays out in my ability to get my left leg forward. That plays out then in my ability to pronate my left foot. Right? If your foot's got problems because you keep overloading it, maybe it's because you don't have rotation in your vertebrae. So how do we target that? Well, we have to teach opposition, which is that the pelvis would go right as the rib cage goes left. And so I have this kind of fix and move principle, which is if I fix your pelvis to the right now at an end range, not just in the middle. It would work in the middle, but it's better if you can get one segment towards an end range and then start having someone kind of tweak themselves through those first 5 degrees and then into the 6th and into the 7th. Yeah. You're starting to pull the system into a shape that kind of works for it. Considerations would still be like, maybe I need to think about being on axis still, and maybe distributing my weight evenly between my feet if I'm doing it bilateral. So there are more considerations than just doing that. But we take the same principle to someone whose rear foot has collapsed and the forefoot's kind of fighting to survive for it. So you've got an everted, pronated rear foot and a neutral looking forefoot, which gives the false perception of an arch, but the movement's gone away. So we might need to lock. What happens then is if I get a person to try and invert their forefoot, which would happen by encouraging them to rotate to the right, for instance, then they'll probably, because of this resting position like this, when you pull that, it pulls the foot with it. So these clumps of movement are happening together. We have to break those habits. So if I block the foot with my hand and invite someone to rotate to the right, as they start doing this, and I forbid the movement to come with, which by the way is no different to me rotating left and pulling the pelvis, lock this down, they can start to create even the tiniest bit of articulation between a joint that wasn't moving before to 1/2 degree now. That movement is like a whoa to the system. And once it's perceived well, because it adds value to the system, they'll start using it again in the way they walk, and they'll notice it. Oh wow, it feels different. Or I can feel my first met on the ground. Or there's always some comment that is like, well, that was effective. And if you're not getting those comments, because what you did it's not a bad thing to do, just not the right thing for that person. And so we have to keep looking.
I think that we call it tweaking in and tweaking out, and that you've got to block the compensation pattern, for want of a better term. And the example that I think makes it really clear to me is in a side bend. If you're looking at somebody's spine and they have joints that don't move, so you have a straight section of the spine,
Yeah.
and then you have one joint that does all the side bending,
Yeah.
you've got to create a setup that blocks that joint from doing all the side bending and forces / encourages the side bending to come from the stiff
somewhere else
joints.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's probably a long conversation for another time, but are there any tools or principles that people can use, like initiating the movement from one end of the body or stuff like that help people to get an understanding of how they can restore motion in those block joints without just continuing to abuse the strategy they've got at the moment?
Yeah. I was going to support what you said by violating the pattern by introducing a new habit or a new behaviour.
Yeah.
And so teaching that behaviour would be the tool. I think the first thing to answer your question would be to really become aware of this idea that if I'm not on axis, I cannot use all of my spine. The solution to this problem is to use all of my spine. So I need to understand what on axis is. So you stand in front of a mirror, put a camera to the side, see how you stand, see where, are you leaning forward? Forward head is obviously kind of prevalent. A lean to the left, probably around where you're moving around that point you're talking about in the spine. And then we want to work out, do I need to kind of block that and move the upper part of the spine? I'm thinking that the movement's probably in the lower part, which is more common. Do I then need to get this vertebrae involved high up? Or do I actually need to teach the bit like we did the flexion extension in the cat-cow, is do I need to teach that bit to bend the other way first to try and straighten it out to then teach me to go left? So you've got two strategies. One is improve side bending as a whole to the left. The other one is get the problem area to go right to straighten up before going left. Because you can't side bend left if you can't side bend right. Weirdly, it's all moving towards a goal of the same. So the flow motion model is a tool which I invite people to learn because that would actually guide us to which one of these strategies we want to choose without guessing or doing both. There's no problem doing both. If I was to be on axis and working with a left side bend, I'm moved into another tool really, but part of the model is to understand the moments when the spine laterally flexes and what everything else is doing at the same time. So to laterally flex left, I'm either going to have my pelvis hiking on the left, weight bearing on my left foot, pronating, and using my arm probably to reach up to influence the rib cage to encourage the movement in those upper vertebrae. That will load all the tissue on the right side of my torso, eccentrically load the tissue on the outside of my left hip, so the abductors eccentrically load the tissue in my feet. So all of that tissue is the catapult effect ready to contract, and that contraction initiates the movement in the other direction. That's why I said earlier you can't go one way without the other. And then I can explore the exact same shape on the opposite side to try and give me the opportunity to go both ways. That's why I said earlier it's simple.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily easy, which is has long been a phrase within AIM circles.
Yeah, that's amazing. One question that just popped up as you described that is, one quick check, would we describe that as left suspension from what you've said there? So within that left suspension shape, is it possible that somebody abuses one part of left suspension? So they're avoiding that side bend, so maybe they sink into that left lateral hip excessively. So maybe we just work through that example to give people an illustration of how we can work within that shape to still target a specific joint motion.
Yeah. So what do we need? This is where it gets deep and dirty and technical. left suspension involves a foot pronation on 3 points of contact. It barely anyone can do. Mm-hmm. That's a really sad statement. But when you work in and assessing people in such a way, you'll realise that they don't have three-dimensional movement through 33 joints, allowing 26 bones to get into an optimal position to allow their body to stand on top of it. Right? That smile kind of says it all, right? Yeah. So you go, how the fuck am I supposed to do left suspension if I can't even kind of get my met head down? So bringing awareness to that, that's why we use the wedges to create a base for people to operate on. The wedges will create the base. It will also influence movement. It will encourage joints to open on the base, which is what one of the definitions of a pronating foot for us, and set a base so that I can flex my knee. So I'm flexing my knee. I'm aiming my kneecap towards the inside of my big toe because that will guide me more into a pronation. That pronation can be experienced by thinking about pressures in your foot traveling anterior and medial, keeping your heel down, don't want to lose the heel. The knee to the inside will encourage an internal rotation in the femur, or it should, so that's something else that we would want to check. And that internal rotation of the femur encourages an anterior tilt of the pelvis, a rotation of the pelvis to the right, and then the weight bearing on the left foot is what will bring the hike into play. And now with the hike setting a base, I talk about an inverted T. So if you take a line between your two PSIS or along the top of the sacrum, you have a 90-degree angle. So if I'm neutral, I'm stood like this, if you can see on the camera. Neutral, I'm stood like this, but if I've got a hike, then the base of my spine will be heading off over there. But I don't want my head over there. I need my head on top, back on axis, so we start to see this lateral flexion. Now, if I create that container of 3 points of contact, knee in the right place, and I say, get your belly button on top of the foot, we've had conversations on our current mentorship where people are saying, I don't believe it's possible to get my belly button on top of my foot. Well, that's because they can't access all of these joint motions. So that's like all of these little, if you can't do the little indicators, then you've got joint limitations. We just, doesn't mean it's not possible. We just need to, there's information to us. That's why I was saying right at the start, it fascinates me because we can always get information just from these. The body's always giving us information if you're willing to listen. So now pelvis is perfectly set up, belly button over the foot, inverted T heading off to the right for us to optimize that lateral flexion. So they would come with a shoulder drop, eyes on the horizon means that you've got the neck going in the opposite way, and then pelvis rotating to the right. It's going to create a left rotation, which you know is happening with the arms behind you in gait when the left leg is forward, so there's a rotation taking place. Eyes on the horizon again is a counter rotation in the neck. So all of this stuff is happening all the way through, and might as well finish with the anterior tilt that's created through the pronation of the leg will lead to the cog of extension, posterior tilt in the rib cage, neck flexion, which a lot of people struggle with because they spend their time here. So this phase of movement, which, by the way, we're trying to promote in a world that's not so much anymore, but still heavily drawn towards taking pronation away, supporting pronation. And that obviously, if you do that, then now we have to do all of the things that I just described in some way more excessively to still try and create that pronation in the foot. And I've long said that I think pronation is the highest value movement in the body. So if you can't do it, your brain will find a way to make that pronation happen. And if that's in your knee, by creating more flexion and external rotation or more of a valgus position to try and promote foot movement that we're trying to take away, you have a massive risk at the knee. So we'll anterior tilt excessively to create pronation. We'll extend our lumbars excessively to create pronation. If it's one side pronation that I struggle with, I'll rotate my pelvis. All of these things create tension and compression in the body. So we have to try and get it right. And I know I hear on the back of that, it's like, oh, it's too much. How am I ever going to get it right? But can I just go back to cat cow on the Pilates mat? You know, I don't know what happens in people's heads, but if you hear this properly, and you recognize that, I guess the next thing to say is this is one body shape. People have spent years trying to learn a yoga pose. Think of this as a yoga pose and learn how to access this, and it will be insanely beneficial for you. But instead of holding a pose, what we do is we move in and out of it so that the joint opens and closes, which means that the tissue lengthens and shortens, and there's a complete neurological experience happening throughout the whole system. And all that to say that if I get all of this in the right position, I can not excessively use that part of my spine anymore. I physically can't. I have to start using others and incorporating that in so that I begin to use more of my vertebrae rather than a few.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think it's a beautiful articulation that in the suspension position, you've almost got a checklist of things that need to happen for a full suspension to be happening.
Exactly. Yeah.
So if it's not happening, then something is being violated in that checklist.
Yeah.
And
something's being missed.
Yeah.
What's missing? And it can be in the minutiae of the midfoot, and it could just be in the fact that people can't flex their necks. Neck flexion is, I don't know if you're aware, just how significant of a movement that can be for someone. A recent client who had a kind of really sad story. It took him an hour and a half just to get through his, it's not even injury history, but health history. Cancers and tumours, and literally everything was focused around his neck, and tongue, throat, neck, and I listened to it, and his come in because his legs are a bit funny, not very stable on his legs. His feet are kind of turned in and awkward gait, and you get totally drawn to that. We can pronate his feet, and we're going to do make sure that there's pelvic rotation and whatever. You could just see that his legs didn't work in a way, so you dive straight in. But listening to the story, you go, this is all about your neck. And it was a very simple case of an hour and a half of chatting to get to this point. Still do the resting posture assessment, so I've got an actual understanding of where his whole body is. Still do the dynamics, so I can see that his rib cage can't go left, but it can go right, but he can rotate right, but he can't rotate left, and he hikes better on the left than that. I still have all that information on the page, but when you come to the head, it's just like full on flip top. We used to joke that like a Pez is going to come out of the front of their neck. Right? So this huge, and like flexion was just impossible. So take him to the wall, put the head on the wall, and just start doing this. Lay him on the floor, start getting this. Do some tissue work to kind of free up all that banged up tissue and completely change the way he walked, just from getting some neck flexion. And I said, I don't want to do anything else. You're just going to do that. And we had a few beautiful sessions, but we went from flexing his neck to then thinking a bit more about his thorax. There was nothing more, but his feet were changing with every rep that we did, and his ability to feel grounded, move through his hips and everything. It blew his mind. It blew my mind. Like if you really find the thing, you know that the whole body is operating around that thing. Yeah. And if you unlock that thing, the whole body will let go and starts moving the way it's supposed to. When I say it's supposed to, obviously I built the model around joint surfaces and the possibilities of how they all communicate together, and then you start to see it happening in real life just because you unlocked the one thing. Yeah. But it's amazing how many people just with some neck flexion will do that. So definitely keep eyes open for that.
There's so many cool aspects to that story, and I think the first one I want to emphasize for people is the in-depth consultation, in that it's easy to get sucked into the obvious stuff going on, seeing foot and lower leg issues, but by really listening to his story, you got the big clues that this might be the actual root cause of the issue. And if he's obviously done a lot of work trying to fix himself previously that didn't work, it's not going to be the obvious ones, because someone probably would have picked up the obvious ones. And for me, I always 100%. Think if the longer somebody's had a frustrating recovery journey, the further afield you generally need to look, because people will always dial in on the pain and symptoms.
Yeah, and you ask what work have you had done, what type of treatments are you used to having, what exercises are you doing, is anything changing? If it's not changing, don't go anywhere near those things, because as we said before, if you don't, your body will only do what it can do. You can feel good after a session, but if it reverts back, it's because there's still something. It's moving back towards the default position that we said right at the start.
Yeah. There's something upstream causing it to gravitate. And the other one was just the principles you're using there to restore a sticky joint motion, in that he didn't feel safe to flex his neck in standing. And please could you just break down your thought process there of the sequence of events of what are you thinking when the first 2 or 3 things you try, the body just won't let it go? How are you giving it the safety that it needs to explore a new position?
Do you mean because I said when he was up against the wall it wasn't so he went on the floor?
Yeah.
I guess I operate in a I used to know a guy who talked about think, feel and know. People are thinkers, people are feelers, and people are knowers.
Okay.
And they normally sit in 2 of those 3 camps predominantly. And I'm a knower.
Okay.
Right? And that means I struggle when I move into, I am also a deep thinker, but if I start overthinking, I get away from my knowing, right? So I kind of operate in that space. I don't really have an attachment to the person's outcome, which is kind of sounds a bit wrong and a bit awkward. I have an attachment to making things work in the way that they should, and then take a look at what the outcome is, and then we see that the outcome is great, and I feel good. So when things are going wrong or the outcome doesn't go where I expect or hope or want it to be, it doesn't rattle me in any way, shape or form. I still know that I need to move that. If it didn't move and change because of what I input, then I just know that I need to look elsewhere. And so my thought process goes back into the model, which is what couples with neck flexion. Neck flexion requires a thorax extension and a lumbar extension, where the 2 things should happen at the same time. So I might go there. They need a tilt. If they can tilt, but they might tilt. They might have tilted happily both ways in their dynamic assessment, but be stuck in an anterior tilt. So you go, they can move it, but they won't move it. This guy couldn't flex his neck, but he could have had a chronically extended neck, but actually be able to flex it in the dynamic assessment. So you still know that you still need to correct that, but it's doing what it can do it, but it won't do it, means that something else is stopping it from doing it. So then we're looking for what I call permission. So something else in the body needs to move in order to give that structure permission to do what it can. And so you've got areas where you can but don't, areas where you don't because you can't, areas that you can and do, and areas that you can but can't. I think that's probably ticked off all 4. Most things come in like little matrices of 4. And so you know that there's a relationship somewhere that will set that free. And so the quest is to find that. And it is like a quest sometimes, but we have processes, assessment processes, a map, which is the model, all to help us and guide us towards that. The model is there are 8 body shapes in that model, and there's only 8 body shapes. We can create more than 8 body shapes, but they're the only 8 body shapes where every single joint is involved simultaneously. As soon as I stop one of those joints being involved, I end up in a different shape, and that's when I lose my ability to be on axis or whatever. Same for the foot, same for the spine, same for the pelvis. So there's, as you said, it's a checklist, and if you just diligently go through that checklist, and you've got injury history in your mind, and you've got life, this guy was medical history, you've got the movement patterns that they can and they can't do, you can piece it all together in a way. As I said, we've got processes for all of that will help you navigate that system. And it's like, it can be an intelligent trial and error as well, and that's fine, as long as you're not attached to the outcome. But it can also be a kind of very clear, as I said, I know that you need this, I'm just going to find whatever it takes to make that happen for you.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's a great articulation of it again. Great. So I think we've got a lot of great high level view of everything.
Yeah.
And we touched on it indirectly a few times, but I think we should address it specifically. We were talking about how a lot of training focuses on the high level qualities of maybe strength or flexibility, whereas you believe that there's a lot of missed opportunities by not looking at a more granular level.
Yeah.
Please, could you explain that a little bit for those who might not understand what I'm talking about?
Well, I think if you've heard what we've been saying for the last, what did you just say, hour and 17
15-ish,
minutes? Yeah. That's kind of it. The base level at which I think people operate is too high. And let's if someone's got a problem, then we tend to be drawn to the problem, and that's almost like a foundational principle that we have. Got backache, treat it. What about what got backache? Understand it. What about you don't have a back problem, you have a whole body problem, and that the causative element is most likely elsewhere. I don't think that's necessarily a new message, but is that a message that's actually being implemented? Are we looking to understand it to create that? A lot of people can feel great from a treatment, but constantly have, got a nagging back. So we want to be able to, you just said granular, which I actually quite like that word, because the granules are the actual nuances and quality and detail of what it takes to move a joint. And it doesn't take the contraction of a muscle to move a joint. It's actually the joint's potential to move within itself, I think. So one of the biggest challenges I have as an educator is bringing people into the fold who are interested, such as people listening to this. I'm really excited about this. I'd love to learn it. They come from a muscle-centric background, and that's because the industry is muscle-centric, and getting people away from that is a tough one. Lots of conversations around getting away from muscle-centric to joint-centric. So, doing calf raises to strengthen your Achilles versus inability to flex your lumbar spine, creating constant pressure on your Achilles. Why don't we look at the lumbar spine? It doesn't hurt. It's not at risk. They can do hyperextensions all day long and ab work all day long, so their pelvis is, but they're moving around their problem, and we're not quick enough, or we don't actually have an approach that will help us to go, what is that problem, and can we work with that? And so that to me is the base layer. So the teams of people that I work with who are working with athletes are all amazing at what they do, but then when I come in and go, it's this, and they go, okay, it's because they didn't have an approach to uncover that. And it's not to take it. They're amazing, and I learned so much from working with these guys. But I can always go in and just with fresh eyes go, we need to address this.
Yeah.
And it might be really subtle, but it's really important, and it's easily missed and overlooked if you don't have the process in place. So trying to put it a bit more simply, I got a sense that working in England, that there were certain fads that would come into the sporting elite. Like all of a sudden, Nordics became, this is how we're going to solve everyone's problem, and the whole club are going to do it every day, and everyone's going to be fine.
The research says.
Yeah, that's another conversation. But really, it's like, what can we do? Hamstrings are a massive problem in football. Let's just strengthen the hamstring. If that's your base layer, then you're way off the mark, because the reality is that the hamstring is a problem because of the way the whole body is interacting at the same time. So lots of anterior tilts pulling up on hamstrings, lots of fast moving feet. I can't even say going into pronation. They're not going into pronation. They're kind of everting or slapping forefoot down, just pulling, changing the timing. We know like heel strike is really important for hamstring, blah, 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 blah. So there's so much to look at that's getting overlooked. And so when I come in and look at that base layer to really understand the person's system, you just know it hasn't been done before. And so that's what I'm saying by inviting everyone to just come back a step. And I think it's trying to understand, trying to recognize cause, trying to live in the why space as to why a person's body is operating in the way it does. And of course, without me there, it doesn't mean that they can't compete or perform or be in their expertise for 90 minutes, but they might be doing that at risk. And the number of ACLs or injuries that happen that are kind of non-contact is quite scary. That means that it's already waiting to happen, because of the way their whole body's set up. So again, it's another whole body problem. So I don't know if that answers your question, but my invitation when anybody comes to work with me is we're going to look back here. I said earlier, set the base, but create the foundation, not just in their feet, but for their whole body to have movement capacity and potential, so that they can do whatever they need to do. They already know what they need to do, right? And that's not my space. They have coaches, they have all of that. I've always said that a golfer can hit a golf ball all day long. If you change his mechanics, he'll still hit that golf ball. He might just feel like it's cleaner or smoother or less impact on his body. But you can consciously try to influence where they cock their wrist, or where they break their elbow, or where they finish the club head, and all of a sudden they're missing the ball for the next period of time. So that conscious versus unconscious approach as well, I think, is a significant part of that. Just stepping back, can we actually get their body to operate at a higher level without thought? Because they don't need to do that. That's how they need to be out there on the pitch.
Yeah, let me check I've understood you correctly. It's essentially trying to allow their body to use more of its joints to perform the movement tasks that it needs to do, rather than just focusing on the movement tasks at its simplest level. Is that?
Yes. But we can all do a squat.
Yeah.
But we'll do it in our way.
Yeah.
And then we'll have cues, which is the coaching, to say you should squat like this. Okay, and now I'm squatting like this consciously, but doesn't mean that I can squat effortlessly in an unconscious way in the way you want me to.
Yeah.
And also, the way you want me to might not be the way my body's set up. So you have to learn to squat in your own way. And the way you do that is to have optimal joint mechanics so that you can squat. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think that there's probably lots of examples like that. But what we'll do is we're going to take that 3x10 set attitude that we learned as a sports therapy, and now take it into an elite sporting environment and do the same thing without understanding the real needs of the players.
Got it.
But we think we do.
Yeah.
But there's actually way more that can be done underneath.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I think this is a perfect segue into one of the questions I had for you, which was around the elite athletes you've been working with in the States. And yeah, just want to know if you've got any cool case studies where, correct me if I'm wrong, you've been working with basketball players, baseball players, and NFL players.
Mm-hmm.
Have there been any things that surprised you, or how are they the same, as I put in the notes, as us mortals, and how are they different? Let's start with that.
to all intents and purposes, anatomically they're the same as mere mortals, and I think this is another kind of like unfazed element is that they walk. When they walk, if you film it, slow it down, and pause at the moment of the gait phases, of which there are, we mostly teach 5 on the ground. In those 5, we can see access to the 8 body shapes. We'll see that they favour one side over the other. We'll see the areas that they move more and the areas that they move less. So that's no different to Johnny coming in, the window cleaner, on a Friday morning, right? No different. The only difference is how they use their body. So we're then taking an injury history. It's often pretty large.
Yeah.
Taking some hits. They're big guys. They're also incredibly powerful. One difference is that I find that they're all very good at executing movement as well, and very aware of their body. So that might be different from Johnny. All right. But again, just to kind of reset, to all intents and purposes, they're the same. So we're just looking at the skeleton and asking what it can do and asking what it needs. That's kind of my approach. I've always said that anyone you work with will come in with what they need tattooed on their forehead, but it's really just written into their skeletal structure and how they're moving and what they're moving around. And so we end up creating the same exercises. So I had a little chuckle because there are 5 movements, 5 phases which create 5 movements. Each movement is an exaggeration of all the components that come together to make that phase. And there are 8 body shapes. So you'll constantly see. This is why like Instagram content's not. It's like, oh, we could just show you one of our 5 movements again. So rather than have an arsenal of 600 movements, we literally operate in these 5 because we know that we can target every bone, every joint, each dimension, and each intercommunicated pattern that exists in the body in this limited range, which is great. So he's got less to learn, but more to do.
Yeah.
And so I had a chuckle because my son was flicking through my phone and he's looking at the elite athletes, and one kind of Hollywood movie star that I was lucky to work with while I was over there, and they're all kind of like stood there, right leg forward, left arm up, and yeah, and he said, "This is hilarious. Imagine that if this was just a joke and you just like got all these people, or you get them all to experience the same weird position and whatever, because there's not much to do. There's just if we understand what we need to do and what phase it lives in and what exercise, and then execute that part, you zoom into that part and execute it perfectly and have it experienced in the whole, it makes change.
Yeah.
Then you can go back. Then you can come out of this granular level and step up. And now you can go into that space of, this is where we do the training. So when I was last over there, Brian and he was training, I was treating, and we would sit and just watch. So we would start to see that when this guy does X, you can see this instability in his pelvis, for instance, and then we'd come to me and we'd go, well, you can see why. This is why it's happening. So do the work, go back to the movement, and then together it was a beautiful thing. So we were actually able to integrate the joint mechanics with the training.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to bestow upon myself that training element because that's not me. I've moved so far away from that. But to be in it and working together as a team, like 2 jazz players riffing off each other, is a really buzzing experience and phenomenal for the athlete. So you're taking the low layer and the high layer, and it makes for a great experience.
Yeah, I think that blending between the treatment and the training is an often missed piece as well, where people think they're either injured or they're fixed, and there are shades of grey between them that need some smoothing out, and that's awesome that you get to do that with those guys. Are there any cool anecdotes you've got from working with those athletes that you can share?
I don't know. There's always cool incidents. The thing that gets me every time, though, in reality, is the mindset. The difference in mindset for their purpose, their drive, and what they want to do and what they want to achieve is blows my mind. It's second to none. And I think that then creates this understanding and appreciation of the work that we're doing. So to start with, it's a bit kind of weird because it's so different. But then it's like they notice the change, that something feels different, or they've got more performance, or they've removed the orthotics from their shoes and feed back the fact that their hips have never felt as good. And that makes them want more, to understand more. But also, and the mindset is a tough one to explain because, but it's what got them there in the first place. It's what will keep them there, and in the awareness of their body not being as good as it could be, then there's a drive to make it better, and therefore to understand more, and that makes the journey of working with them so much more interesting. Versus what I used to get in London quite a lot was fix me so I can just go back to don't care, don't do my homework. I always said if people can really feel the difference in they'll do the homework. But then there's also this kind of like, that didn't really tick my box. I mean, the amount of times I quit clinic just to focus on education, and then I'd get drawn back to it again. It was because of people really not kind of massively buying into it and not seeing eye to eye on some level, and that was always a bit of a struggle. But at an elite level, it's a completely different experience for me.
Yeah. I think I've had a small dose of the same thing with some of the people I've worked with, in that when somebody cares about the result on a really deep level, the level of investment they're willing to make is what makes a lot of the stuff work. And when you get somebody who, like you say, wants you to fix it for them, you can't. It doesn't work like that.
It doesn't work like that.
Exactly.
No.
And yeah, it's really cool to see when people...
I say on my website, I don't enter into an I fix you, you fix me relationship with anyone. That's kind of part of the Wake Your Body Up process, which is basically trying to enable people to take ownership and have an understanding of their own body before... You might need to go and see someone, for sure. But if the more understanding you have, the more awareness you have, the more ownership you have, the more likely you are actually to get out of jail. And I think that if somebody is to come and expect major change without their own effort, then it's a meaningless journey.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and these athletes, they just, like you said, the ones that I've worked with, they ask really pointed questions. They really want to understand what they need to know. They're like, explain this to me so I fully understand it, so I'm bought in, and then I'll do anything. Yeah. Like if it makes sense to me, I can feel I can feel the difference. Then I'll do whatever you say I need to do. But I think a lot of them have been burned, and makes them a bit skeptical that everyone's 100%. Always trying to pitch them some nonsense. Yeah, 100%. So they really want to kick the tires before they invest that effort.
Yeah. Which is fair enough.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Totally.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I think I really admire that as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving on, what else did I want to ask you about? So I think if you've listened this far and you've listened to our first episode, you should be bought in on the idea that gait is the fundamental movement pattern that underpins all other movements. So if we want to get good at gait, the first thing a lot of people will be thinking about is how do we strengthen gait, or how do we improve our performance out of gait? And the classic ways of thinking about this would be loading gait or adding resistance to gait. And something I've thought about a lot is how can we do so in a way that doesn't negatively impact our mechanics, because most of the traditional ways of loading gait involve locking down certain areas to hold the weight. So looking at farmers carries or dragging a sled, using parachutes when sprinting, or yoke carries. Have you thought about this in the same way? And yeah, what is your thought process around adding resistance to gait?
Again, and I already said it, like, I don't really step up into that arena with people.
Sure.
So the arena where I am working and see that happening is one where, as long as we make sure that they have access to their joint movement, motions, what I call having access to all of their resources, as long as that is present pre and post,
Okay.
you can do whatever the hell you like. Because when your job is to move not one 250, 300 pound person, but three of them, you need that. But you also know that you're gonna take hits, you're gonna get in compromised body positions. Then what's more important to me is that we're able to manage all of that. So would I avoid farmers' carries, or because it's going to compromise my joint position? Absolutely not. But would I spend time making sure that I have the movement and fluidity in my joints and I'm more centered and balanced so that I can do that? Absolutely. Because we've already said that most people find themselves off axis rather than on axis. Most people have a foot that they favour more weight bearing wise, which is you've got A or B or both. Most people struggle to find a tripod, and therefore just favour movements that create a dominance to one side. And if you load that, then potentially you're loading a problem. I always used to say we put a foot scan up on the screen and there'd be all the weight in the right heel, a bit of weight in more weight in the left forefoot, not much in the right forefoot, and a little bit of weight in the left heel. And I used to say, would you want to squat on that? Or would you rather have even left to right, distributed forwards and backwards, and a really nice centered 50-50 and squat on that?
Yeah.
Right? Can we create that environment and then load it?
Yeah.
I actually think that answers the previous question better about about this baseline.
Yeah.
Not just going to work to solve a problem, but actually creating an environment where the problem solves itself so that you can go to work.
That's very cool. Yeah, that's a really nice way of picturing it. You just made me think of another question, which I think we touched on slightly before, but how do we reconcile the need for tension with the need for relaxation and letting joints go? And it's something I thought about a lot as I've started doing less gymming, playing more sports. And in sport, it's always about being fluid and being loose and not being tense.
Yeah.
But in the gym, it's all about creating that tension. And you know, I'm sure you've assessed tons of gym bros as well. But some guys I've assessed, the level of resting tone is unbelievable. Like they're made out of granite, which is cool. But at the same time, how do you move? You know, if you wanted to play golf or something like that, or be a boxer, there's just no way you're moving smoothly or fast.
Yeah.
So how do we reconcile the development of strength and the ability to create tension versus stay loose, whippy and explosive?
Don't give me those eyebrows. I would go as far as to say that the holding tension is down to an inability to let go. It's a way of solving a problem that then becomes an identity and is associated with the gym bro status, if you like. I was always under the impression that kind of granite muscle is not actually healthy, but you can have big, great looking muscles, but they're still palpable. They give some pushback rather than just like resistance. I don't believe that if you were to assess the gait of these people that they would have fluidity and motion in their spine. So not just spine, hips, feet, horrendous.
Move like a fridge, is what I say.
Yeah, move like a fridge. And again, through no real fault of their own, they just go about training in a classic way. They work really hard. They make their gains. They probably eat their protein, tick all their boxes. But would you agree, before I say it, but a lot of them then struggle with discomforts, and I've worked with people who they only feel comfortable when they're training in the gym, but life outside of that is pretty horrendous. And so all of that tension and the requirement for that tension in their activity is not required in daily life. And if they're anything like me, then their daily life is far more, in terms of percentages, I'll spend more percentages not training and working out than I do.
Yeah.
I remember somebody saying if you do the whole 3 hours a week that the GP recommends, then it's like 3% of your week is spent doing exercise. 97, you better be good at those 97%.
Yeah.
And that's having freedom in your system.
Mm.
And I that's so I would always come back down to this layer, and would be promoting the ability to have movement in the system. Again, I mean, it starts to get repetitive, I think.
No.
But it's reinforcing. But I mean, I've been repeating myself for 20 plus years. But the you should be able to lift and execute high level movements under ridiculous load and still have mobility, balance, and variability in your system. Ironically, you would probably feel more comfortable around it. I don't know why this lady just popped into my head, but she stood at the back of a room in 2014 in San Francisco, and she's holding kind of perfect posture, which is it's the same. She's holding tension in her system. Pilates teacher, and she just popped her hand up to ask a question, started talking about all of the neck tension and neck discomforts, and we asked the question, are you choosing to stand the way you do? Like, it was obvious. You stand, seeing her right from the word go, holding herself like this, and we verbally gave her permission to, you don't have to stand like that anymore. You can just let go. And she actually let go, and within seconds had burst into tears. And her instruction was, in order to be whoever and in front of a class or whatever, this was it. So she was holding it as a story. And the letting go was literally a huge letting go for her, and giving her permission to be in another state. But then not just that, leaving it at that, but now we can actually move into this position, out of this position. It's okay to extend the neck, flex the rib cage. In fact, if you can do that, you actually load and unload muscles on the front and the back. You create freedom, you create awareness, you feel different in your feet. It just can be easy.
Yeah.
So they're holding it for a reason.
Yeah.
Either it's that creating a false perception of who you are type space, or they literally can't not, because it's uncomfortable. I'm not sure if there's any shades in between. I don't know, probably are.
Yeah.
But
Bracing to avoid painful positions. Okay.
Yeah.
And is there anything that we're doing fundamentally wrong, in air quotes, the way we go about resistance training that promotes that? Because the thought process I've been through with this is, I want to get stronger, but if that strength is for sport and it actually negatively impacts my sporting performance, this classic way of strength training isn't doing what I want it to do. So, I think the simple synopsis of this is, we're doing bodybuilding, we're not doing strength training. We're building muscles, we're targeting hypertrophy to grow a muscle belly rather than to increase its force output directly. So is that why people are ending up in these situations, why they're so tense and actually reducing their movement options? Whereas if you were a performance athlete, say you're a kickboxer, an MMA fighter, they always make these complaints of, when I do my too much lifting, I feel slow and I feel stiff. so they don't feel as good at fighting because they're so attuned with their bodies.
Mm.
So is it the right thing to do? Is it
What's
the
the
right way
balance?
of doing it?
Well, I think this is where the term sport specific comes into play. I find myself thinking about, obviously, Kai. I'm super close to my son, obviously, and his kind of goals to be an elite climber. And he would say the same, that even though you need to be stronger as a climber, you don't get it through traditional lifting techniques. So you have to learn about the specific requirements of the sport to be able to move in that direction. I think if you're lifting for lifting's sake and that's your sport and it's sculpting or whatever, it might be a different conversation.
Yeah.
For you and I, who want to be able to play paddle on Monday, golf on Wednesday, and have a climbing session on Friday, they're all very different. So the way you approach your training then, so that you're not compromising, is going to be, I don't know what that would be. For me, it's like I said at the beginning, just making sure that I'm prepared.
Yeah.
For any outcome in those activities.
Which generally isn't super tense and super tight.
Well, I don't think I've got. I'm not that at all. Totally It's not that I'm like loose as a goose and flippy floppy. I have integrity in the system that I've trained, but that it's become unconscious, not conscious. Whereas I used to have to avoid my problems by holding myself in a certain way. And after years of like intense observation and having people intensely observe me, like with Chris, he used to help me a lot. We were studying and teaching together, and then he would assess me, and I'd be like, crazy, why am I holding my arm like this? I wasn't even aware of it, unconsciously doing this. I'll dislocate his shoulder, so I let it go. Oh, it's not very comfortable. Oh, it leads to neck. Now I've got to understand the neck. Oh, that's the jaw. To a point where I think about it because I want to make sure that my default remains positive and I've got access to all my movement. I don't have to think about it because I'm now no longer holding myself in compromised positions. I'm so much freer in my body, but free unconsciously, which is different to then trying to be free consciously. Because you just give a cue like relax it, relax it, relax it. They don't even know how to relax it.
Yeah.
Maybe they can't. I'm wondering if this is around that unconscious versus conscious element of being. It's not even really a movement conversation or a strength conversation or a training conversation, but is who am I in my body? Where am I in my body? And what is my body good at, and what is it not good at? And what do I need to, because you say, what do I need to let go of?
Yeah.
You might not even know what you need to let go of without actually diving into some kind of inquiry into that. And what does letting go look like? Is it actually, am I letting go of my right hip by relaxing it and breathing into it? Or am I letting go of my right hip in a way that promotes three-dimensional movement? Is the reason that I can't let go of my hip because I've got all my weight on that leg and have never put my weight on the left leg? And a really weird story around that is someone who's, as a 13-year-old, stood on a nail, and that hurt at the time, but years later it doesn't cause them a problem at all. But they never put that part of the forefoot back on the ground. Now they've got tension in the right hip. I had a kid who was going to, what do they call it? He was going to these pain management classes. He was 19 years old, just gone to university, and was having to spend half his time in a pain management class during his in-between studies. And he stood in my clinic one day after we'd done some movement, and he actually voiced, what the fuck am I supposed to manage now?
Wow.
Yeah, as a 19-year-old, he was frustrated, and and giving his body permission to unconsciously be somewhere else. When you give the body permission to unconsciously be somewhere else, you do it without thinking, and it is mad. You don't realize what you're holding on to, don't realize the position that you got stuck in until you see another way. And that's what I mean by the brain then chooses. This is where I feel effortless, this is more efficient, I'm going to move towards that. And through my sessions of working with people, I call it following the breadcrumbs. So breadcrumb 1 is your perception of center and default position for today. Then we're going to do some movement. We're going to give permission to joints that haven't been able to movement, and that's going to just, once that starts moving, it will change, your brain will organize itself around that new movement, so that we can look at breadcrumb number 2, which should be a different posture. 20 years, I'm not used to looking at this posture and then reassessing the same posture, whether that's 20 minutes apart or a session apart. If I see the same posture, I know that I just need to revisit, find the real problem, because what I did last time isn't the solution. I'm not going to do it harder, better, stronger, faster. I'm going to find the, and then now it's changed. So I've got stories of people who go from this posture to this posture to this one to this one to this one, and that's what I call finding center. I'm allowing them to find their own journey out of the predicament through movement, and that's happening unconsciously, not conscious. We can't ask someone to flex your neck when you're walking, because if you hold that, you take away the extension, which we can connect to foot supination. We can't ask them to drop their shoulder. You can't be an elite athlete thinking about your body when you've got to execute your job. And actually that goes for anyone. And so I think the unconscious environment of understanding, we used to what did he used to call it? If you're doing a check-in in your own body, which is where 40 people in a classroom all standing and they're about to check, it would be, you need to be the real you. Not the person that stands in front of the class and needs to look good or any of that. It has to be an honest inquiry. So you just have to, in that phrase, let it go. But that's more like, don't assess yourself here with your shoulders back and down. Don't assess if we do science on force plates, it's like, I don't know if it still is, but it used to be like, I think 1.5 centimeters heels apart and 16 degrees. So you're fixing someone into a position and then trying to assess who they are. But of course, that's not them. Yeah. So who are you really in a movement inquiry space? And that starts to show some real stuff. Yeah. And so now we've talked about this, and I want you to come here. But this is probably like almost bordering on the spiritual. Yeah. Like, who are we in our bodies, and what do we represent, and what are we putting out to the world, and is that causing us a problem or not?
But when you say what are you holding on to, it's not just physiological. Like, there's a lot of
course,
holding, repressing emotions and everything else which manifests in your body, and that absolutely has repercussions.
Connotations, yeah. I'm going to say that one of the beauties of this work, oh my God, I just thought about a guy. One of the beauties of this work is that it does impact on the emotional status. And I'm not saying like my work is the be-all and end-all, but you can focus on emotional status, and there's recognition that can be held in the body. Releasing or changing our mind doesn't necessarily mean I can flex my knee better. But weirdly, flexing your knee better and creating a ripple effect through the spine can change the way we self-reflect and so it's like we can actually target our nervous system, our muscle system, our organ system, our emotional system, our fascial system through movement. And that's where I think it becomes a really beautiful healing modality. So, it's great to talk about creating exceptional opportunity in elite athletes, but really it's a healing modality. Yeah. And I think that's the thing that I'm most connected to.
That's cool
about it.
Yeah, the body definitely affects the mind. And I think when we talk about default shapes and default positions, when I'm stressed and tired, I will gravitate more towards my default position for sure. So that's purely
Does it
psychological.
look like this?
Yeah, just in the fetal position on rocking myself to sleep. Yeah, so I think that, I mean, this is a huge conversation for another time, I think, but it needs to be acknowledged that it all plays together. And maybe just that, we'll put a pin in that one for the next one. But the sporting tension question, I remember seeing a presentation on levels of tone and correlating it with your athletic ability, and the greatest performers always had the lowest levels of tone. So they were looking at people like Michael Jordan and Wayne Gretzky, and doing the same tasks, they would have lower levels of tension in their body, which says lots of things. But I think relative to this conversation, it's they can access the positions with less internal resistance, and they're more economical doing those movements, which arguably facilitates their higher levels of performance. So whenever you're straining or trying or tensing, you are fighting yourself to get the same job done. And golf is the perfect example of this for me, in that as soon as you try to hit it too hard, you don't hit it as far and you mishit it.
I didn't witness that the other day. Swine. I believe, I think that's 100% correct. The real question is what creates the levels of tone, and is it movement ability and movement inability, which creates more effort versus less effort? I mean, there are areas about hours of practice and how you execute your movement over and over again versus someone else. I think the Steph Curry conversation is the amount of shots per day to do what he does. You can use numbers to completely dominate someone else in your sport just by doing something more and more and more and more. David Beckham with his free kicks, Cristiano Ronaldo, Lionel Messi. There's always something exceptional about these people. And I do think there's a fluidity and grace as well to it. The thing I was thinking when you were talking is we always talk about 3 E's, which is efficiency, effortless, and energy conservation. And in the absence of the ability to move any part of your body optimally, you increase the effort, reduce the efficiency, and waste energy. And so to be able to target those things, and they're a natural outcome that happens. Like walking can become effortless, and you conserve more energy because you don't have to try. You see efficiency displayed on a force plate in just in the way the curve moves through the foot. It's not like getting just in front of the heel and stammering a bit, and it's actually flowing. Hence the flow motion model. Flow motion, slow motion, slow it all down, look at it, zoom in, create flow through movement experience, and all of that lends itself to better in whatever regard.
Yeah, spot on. Shoes.
Oh God!
You knew it was coming. I'm just thinking what the best angle to approach this is. What should people be thinking about with shoes? I think I've got a feeling you're going to give a simple answer, but I want a complex answer.
You want a complex answer? Okay. What if shoes weren't the problem? What if what you put inside them is? Yeah?
Yeah.
How does that resonate?
A lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Shoes, people call them like foot coffins. Talk about narrow toe boxes. Talk about, too much cushioning. I'm kind of fascinated by all of the gimmicks that are added to shoes, and without any real understanding as to why they might be added. I mean, you can find out why they've done it, but it doesn't really resonate with the actual movement of the foot. I think, there are certain, if you make a heel wider than the heel, then you change the timing of contact on your heel so that you end up more pronated than supinated when you actually put the foot on the ground. So your mechanics can be affected by the shoe, but it's because the mechanics are not biomechanically sound to enable and facilitate movement in the foot. But that doesn't matter for most people. How many times have I touched the one thing you said to me was, do not touch the mic. 6 times. Not very good at listening to other people. It's okay for people to wear. They don't notice. They wear those shoes. They had a shit heel strike anyway. They fall into a pronation anyway. The shoe supports that anyway. It's just a shoe. But then we blame the shoe because of they've got a knee problem or back problem. Oh, it's the shoes. What the fuck are you talking about? It's the shoes. This is a piece of cloth with a little bit of rubber, and we're going to blame them. I'm pretty sure if you look at the X-rays of people's toes jammed into the end of a shoe, that's the deliberately chosen shoe that is too small, because any tailored shoe would be wide enough if fitted properly at the balls of the foot, at the metatarsal end, and not necessarily have that influence. I mean, my foot, that should not go in a shoe. It's perfectly comfortable in a shoe, right? Because I know how to fit a shoe. I know what size my foot is. Most people don't know what size their foot is.
Which way do they generally get it wrong?
They love to have a bigger foot. Right? What size are you? What size is your foot?
What, the on-air version or the real version?
We're on an honest space here.
10. I'd wear a 10.
You're a 10.
Yeah. Do you reckon?
Has this ever been done before on a podcast? So I don't reckon you're a 10.
No?
No.
I think so. I have to get. I'd say I'm a 10, maybe even more in width.
Yeah.
But yeah. 9.
Wide, same as me. Wide foot.
I think everyone's got wide feet. Like everyone who complains about shoes is always like, oh yeah, but I've got wide feet. So maybe they're not wide feet, they're narrow shoes. That's what the conclusion I've come to.
Conclusion. Yeah. So I actually measure a 7.5.
Really?
Yeah.
That's
small
crazy.
feet. Like you can think what you want about the rest of my anatomy on that basis.
Wow.
And in some shoes I wear a 7.5, and others I wear an 8.
Yeah.
But I'm aware of comfort and requirement, etc. in my shoe. But I got to this point because of the ski boot fitting. When people would say to me, "I'm a 10. Can I get a set? Can I get a set of size 10 ski boots?" And I'd put them on and the foot measured 26 centimeters, which is an 8, which is the most common, by the way, size that you'll see when measuring people's feet. So 8 is your average. But not many blokes will tell you they've got a size 8 shoe.
Yeah.
Right? Then I have this argument with my wife all the time. Like, it's if the shoe fits, not what size it is, because they have different measurements, etc. Anyway, that's kind of a different conversation. I think I don't like the idea that we moved towards blaming shoes.
Yeah, fair.
When actually it's another introspective look at how does my foot function. So then also, we can talk about shoes having anti-pronation devices, which is a way of using the shoe to influence how to minimize that high value movement I described earlier called pronation, which might look great on the treadmill camera if you go for a run in these new shoes with the insole built, which is what I used to do in the ski boots. But I think the harder the exterior of the shoe, the more rationale you have for controlling the foot's position inside it, because it can be uncomfortable like a ski boot. But maybe you don't need that so much in a fabric shoe. I forgot where I was going.
Not blaming shoes for foot problems. But I just want to ask a question around that. In that, I used to work in an office wearing smart shoes every day in a suit, and since changing to working in fitness, and then probably since moving here and wearing shoes even less, I feel like my foot shape has changed.
Yeah.
It's got wider and potentially shorter. So if I wear smart shoes that I used to wear when I worked in an office, they feel incredibly tight width-wise, and potentially there's a bit more room near the toe. How would you explain that if the shoes are not influential on my feet?
On the one hand, I don't want to say that they're not influential. I don't think we should blame them. I think you need to make better choices around your footwear, which is probably the question that you had. So I can put shoes on that I feel drive me into more of a pronation movement than I would like. I'm not going to buy that shoe. People buy shoes because they like the look and feel and smell of it, rather than does it actually work for me? So, always joke, like with my wife, she's fashion, I'm function. That's how it's always been. We had a joke, whether it's a toaster, she looks great, it doesn't work. So what if we can find both? So that's why I hate buying shoes, because it takes me forever. Because the shoe that I had last time, in the name of progress, evolution, and more sales, is no longer in in production. Now I have to find a new shoe. So if you take your feet out of shoes and live barefoot, I think your feet will change if they can. But correct me if I'm wrong, are you actively promoting movement in your foot bones since learning with me?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So you're creating a different permission there to others. So if you transition to the barefoot lifestyle to get out of shoes for whatever reason, not just because we're blaming shoes for problems, but it makes sense to me that it's more natural. We live a caveman lifestyle, like the kind of caveman diet. There's all kinds of benefits to being closer to the earth, grounding, etc. But does the barefoot shoe actually change the foot as well, or not? So what I noticed was, walking people in barefoot shoes over a force plate, is that it doesn't really change the mechanics of the foot from barefoot to shod. So Matthew Walden, who owned the Vibram Five Fingers, said to me, well, at least it does what it says on the tin, which is it will enable your foot to perform in a barefoot way. Now, what if your barefoot doesn't perform in a way that's conducive to a healthy body? Then the barefoot shoe will allow that to happen. If one of the ironies of, I think, anti-pronation shoes and even orthotics as an arch lifting device is, if the foot's really stiff and holds itself in a flat everted position, and you lift it up, you kind of change it from this to this, which hasn't introduced movement into the bones. So we know the way to introduce movement into the bones is to create this kind of jellyfish movement, not this. Even in classrooms, we go, he can show me with your hand what pronation and supination is. Pronation, supination. I'm like, well, that's eversion and that's inversion. What about all the plantar flexion, dorsiflexion, and adduction, abduction? You end up with this jellyfish movement. We want our feet to be able to do that. So somehow the foot needs to allow, and hence, the wide toe box makes sense, because we've got more opportunity for that. But we can create that in ourselves and then wear a shoe, versus doing nothing with our feet and allowing them to move in a rigid way, and then putting a shoe on and then going, oh, the shoe's the problem. I've never worked with anyone who has feet that move well until showing them how to move their feet, ever. I've never seen 2 feet the same, left to right, ever. We do these things called poor man's foot scans, which is draw around the foot, get the pencil, feel the talus, look at the angle, look at the difference between the second metatarsal and the way the talus is facing, get them to bend and straighten their knee and see if there's movement present, and then compare. And the right one looks different to the left one. They don't rest the same. that already we've got an influence in the pelvis and a change in the rib cage position. You can see it from what you're drawing on the floor. And so your foot, if we go back to the idea that it's a whole body problem, and then you put it in a shoe and blame the shoe, it's never going to be the shoe. And I think that's the biggest odds I have with the conversation. So I used to say, you find a shoe that you can dominate rather than a shoe that dominates you. And I think you can feel that. But again, if you've got no movement awareness, or you don't know what movement is in your body, you just put a shoe on and crack on. You're cool with that until the straw breaks the camel's back and you have a problem.
Yeah, that's a nice way to think about it. However, are there some sports shoes that are near impossible to dominate? And I'm thinking about basketball shoes as one that, you know, typically they're big, they've got a lot of ankle support, and you could have the best moving foot in the world, but that's still going to change the way you move. But is it in a good way? Is it actually doing what it claims it's doing?
I hear where the brain's going.
Mm-hmm.
Let's try and look at it a slightly different way. If your foot doesn't have movement potential in it, the bigger problem the shoe could be. I don't know if that's contradicting everything I just said, but
no, I think that
the idea that if I can come out of if I sit at a desk all day and I own a certain posture all day and I'm too busy to stand up and walk around every, whatever they say, 10 minutes, and I stay in that position when I go to bed at night, same conversations earlier, drive home, I'm kind of locking myself into the problem. So if I come out of my shoe, if my workout program is to mobilize the bones in my feet, these guys will think about having a routine for their shoulders, a routine for their hips, a routine for their core. No one has a routine for their feet.
Yeah.
Like, just have a routine for your feet, and you'll notice that they actually move better in the shoe. One of the NFL players was taking the orthotics out of his shoes and letting his foot be free and teaching him how to move his foot on the wedges and understand that better, meant no hip problems in the season. Didn't change the shoe. Took the orthotic out, so we did change the influence there. But if an orthotic, I understand why we have orthotics. I started working with orthotics, but orthotics, if they're taking away the movement in our feet, we're just going to create more of that required movement higher up. For him, it was his hips. So we gave his hips permission to move by allowing his feet to move, no problem. So it's a big conversation. I keep looking at your shoes. I'm just like, how can they be so, problematic? But they look totally normal. So
here we go, live shoe analysis. They're years old, actually. So
it's all right. Don't stop making excuses.
No, I'm not making. I'm saying it's a good thing.
There's nothing sticking out the back.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing sticking out the sides. That means that you have an opportunity to heel strike back here. If that was wider, like this, or back here, then your contact point is wider than the foot, creating an angle change and a fulcrum difference, which is going to create a tip sooner rather than later. And there's then nothing built into the forefoot to manage the forefoot and the timing of that. So the foot would just slap all the time. This has got less chance of that happening because you don't have anything sticking out the back, you don't have anything sticking out the wings. So when you heel strike, if you heel strike well, you set yourself up for a nice footstep. If you don't heel strike well, you're chasing all the way through. And that's chase is happening throughout the system. So if we don't influence this, or we don't create this to allow the biomechanics of what should be happening in that moment to occur together, you potentially can change the timings. But that's where you probably also, not you particularly, but the wearer of the shoe has no idea about where they should heel strike and what position their knee should be in and where their mass should be. And when you get analysis for people, you'll see that most people, when they're heel striking, still have weight in the other leg because they're unwilling in some way to commit to this one. And so that just exacerbates it further. So my own mechanics and the shoe's setup are contributing. So it's teamwork. Maybe why don't we settle with that?
Okay.
You've got a shit shoe and a shit body, you're going to have problems.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Optimize your body, change the shoe so it works for you, it's comfortable, no problems.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's probably where I get to with it. And then there's all kinds of stuff built into 4 feet, different angles, different shapes, different influences, shoes that look like this, shoes that look like this. And most of it is built around some level of conventional thinking. And actually, if we move into an unconventional way of thinking, which is probably my way, maybe we can do something different with shoes.
I like the sound of that. Yeah, I'm just processing that. And I mean, this is potentially a never-ending conversation because we could go through each sporting shoe one by one. But the one that I think jumps out at me, which I'm sure you'll have thought about, is rock climbing shoes. Because they're so tight and you size them small and it has to limit the movement options of your foot, but for good reason.
Serves a purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are you thinking about there in terms of managing feet whilst getting the benefit of a rock climbing shoe?
Buy some wedges. Learn to pronate and supinate your feet.
Yeah.
Climb.
Okay.
So one of the reasons I love climbing so much is that it's a real opportunity to explore 3-dimensional movement in body, in a variety of body shapes that you don't necessarily get in many other sports. The repetition factor it's kind of present because you learn moves that are similar, and the task is to achieve. You might have to use a certain move to overcome a problem on the wall. But there's so many problems that you're constantly in kind of different positions. Again, it comes down to the anatomy. So people who have shoulder problems, it's because they're stuck in this position and going climbing without having the freedom of movement in those places. So again, the shoe, like you said, serves a purpose. And I'm trying to think of another sport, maybe you can help, that where I'm wearing something that reduces my movement.
Knee sleeves or
but the
weightlifting
belt, yeah, again, it's kind of serving a purpose. But what's the purpose of a weightlifting belt? So from your perspective?
Well, there's a couple. I'd say primary ones would be to reduce excessive motion through the lumbar spine and also give you something to brace against to create tension and stability through the midsection.
Yeah, and should you be able to do both of those things without it?
Yes.
Yeah. So, but then it's harder and harder with the higher loads.
Yeah.
Right. So when I take the weightlifting belt off, should I be learning to do those things?
Yes.
Without the load, right? So I think that's the same conversation. You're going to take that off, and then I need to be able to mobilize my spine. Maybe I need to train it to flex so that I don't overuse the extension. Probably, I don't know if people still think about core stability in the way it was. I feel like it's a dying art in a little bit.
Still lingering, I'd say.
Yeah.
Still lingering, yeah.
Obviously, that's another conversation between locking down and having mobility present. But I still think having an awareness of the role of the TVA and its connection to spinal mechanics, pelvic floor, diaphragm is huge. Maybe that's the lost art piece. But if we're going to take the weightlifting belt off, shouldn't we mobilize our spine in a way that helps us to find balance and cool down territory? In the same way, if we take the shoes off, we just need to. But the problem is you're more likely to do this one than you are the shoe because nobody knows what to do with the foot.
Yeah.
So it's just being locked in and creating these gnarly shapes. Everyone will have different opinions about that. But again, my foot doesn't look like it should go in a climbing shoe.
Yeah.
Super wide, narrow heel, and and yeah, you have to take the shoes off between climbs sometimes because they're getting sore, but they serve a purpose. And as long as you move away from it in a way that allows you to put movement back into the foot in the system, which obviously we've already talked about, I'm doing to myself on a regular basis, then it shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And the purpose that rock climbing shoes serve, like we said with the belt, that you're able to train yourself to brace without a belt, what purposes are the rock climbing shoes serving, and how would your feet fare without rock climbing shoes at achieving that?
I don't want to do it an injustice, but the rubber is going to be around friction.
Yeah.
So the material, to friction on the wall. Then you have different types of shoes, more downturn, which will create more of this shape because you actually need to put your toe on a very small area. I mean, you can be on if you're outdoors anyway and indoors, they'll create these problems with really tiny footholds that you need to be able to apply pressure on and create that tension that you're talking about. I mean, some of the elite people are able to put their toe in almost inside the little holes where you're supposed to screw the hold on and get some kind of friction out of that. Wow. And then other ones might have a bit more forefoot movement, be a bit easier, so you can kind of on a slab, which is where you can drop your heel and smear. And they've got people, you'll see climbers drop on the mat, whip a shoe off. They'll just take the left one off and put the other one on because they know that in that particular problem, that left one is, they need that to happen. So it serves a purpose. It's all about your interaction with the wall. I just in my own head come back to our interaction with our foot and the outside world is the missing kind of piece for a lot of people's movement.
So do climbers train their toes like they train their fingers? Is that a thing?
No, only in the act of climbing. Yeah, I guess.
Because you got the beast makers and fingertip pull-ups and stuff. It seems like there would be a benefit to learning to stabilize and drive through.
I think they just do that in the act. Yeah, in the act of doing it.
It's probably not as much of a limiter as hand and finger strength.
No, and the shoe's not necessarily. It's not like you're contracting to make that happen. It's a placement, and the shoe has rigidity in that area to allow you to maintain that.
That's cool.
But what blows my mind is how much force even when there's no hold, how they can hug the wall and create friction on a vertical surface to push up from without a hold. All that stuff is just that comes out of the wash with the training.
Yeah, that's nuts, isn't it? And even as we were just talking about it, and I'm thinking about climbing, it goes back to what we were talking about before with tone. When climbers are doing their pull-ups compared to bodybuilders doing their pull-ups, climbers make them as easy as possible, whereas bodybuilders are trying to make the pull-ups as hard as possible by going slower, by not moving this, not using that, not swinging, and the best pullers in the world are climbers. The most, if you were to isolate a population who could do one-arm pull-ups, it would be climbers, even more so than calisthenics guys. And
presumably you've watched Magnus on his YouTube,
and it's case in point that he's competing with all these other athletes from different disciplines and holding his own more than. And I think it's because the focus is sports rather than training. So it's all about output. Like, can I pull myself up with one finger? And I'm going to use the whole body to help me achieve that. Yeah. Versus in the gym where it's like, if you do a pull up, no swinging, don't stay in a fixed hollow position. Yeah. Scaps first, then depress, then all this.
The reality is on a climbing wall, you may be required to hang on a single finger mono, which is a pocket like this. Friend Buster Martin is, if you look at his YouTube, his ability to do pull-ups on a single finger, front levers on single fingers, climbing action direct, which is basically lots of single finger pockets, a 9A standard, and then to watch him train his fingers, it is you realise the hours you put in to be able to do that is what you get out. But I was going to say, if you're under a bar and doing a pull-up, or even a single arm pull-up, which I can't do, when you're on a climbing wall, your body will be in this position when you need to make that happen, or it will be in this position and you need to make that happen, or you'll be in this position. It's never the same. It's never uniform. It's never uniform, and that's the beauty of it for me. So you're actually creating the capacity in all kinds of positions. You've got a 360-degree potential shoulder, and you need to be able to access all those ranges. But the only way you train for that is in the environment. But if you're doing lock-offs, you're going to end up mostly in this position, often maybe with a little bit of a curl, maybe using a resistance band to help, or then doing it on the 3 fingers. Then you have to go on the wall and express that strength in your own way.
Yeah. And that ironically makes you stronger in the narrow version than you would be just doing the narrow version. So if you're just doing strict pull-ups,
yes,
and there's no variation around the strict pull-up, you actually end up less efficient, less strong in the strict pull-up than if you added in that variation, because you get more joint motion, more muscle recruitment.
That's a beautiful thing. I don't know if that kind of lands. The uniform one is like the center point, and you repeat that over and over again, versus creating a boundary of movement and experiencing it in all these places. So out here is the hardest place to experience it. The better you get at that, all of a sudden this becomes a solid, enhanced strength thing as well. So I think that a lot can be taken from that. I talk about in my book, I talked about, and I guess this is back when I wrote it in 2012-13, thinking about stability. And that center point you just talked about is we were training people to be stable in what we perceive to be center. I later realized that we're not. We've got those awkward foot pressures that I talked about earlier, and trying to make myself stable on that, which is not wise. But when I moved into the realm of movement from stability, is this idea that I can explore all of the end ranges, all of the parameters for movement that are possible to me, and then the mobility on the inside of the circle became more important than the stability at this point, and the awareness is that stability happens at the end.
Yeah.
When I'm actually moving here, I get to a point of stillness before return. That's the piece that we might need to exploit in the main for people to have a movement awareness in their joints, 2, movement potential in the muscles, but 3, that center point that you just talked about in the pull-up is locked in.
Yeah.
And then most people, you could draw people's circles. They favor left more than right. They never really get to this side of the circle. It's a dark zone for them, somewhere that they never get to explore. So we then go, oh, well, your center, that bit where you're most stable, is actually more left than right. And that's a problem. And that's how we're all operating.
Yeah, that's really cool. There's so many movements jump to mind when you describe that. And it's basically like, how far away in which directions can you go, and then return to ideal mechanics, ideal bar path, ideal line of pull. It's always, if you want to dial in a movement and be super precise, that means you need to be able to correct deviations from that movement, and your ability to experience those deviations, recognize them and correct them requires the variation. Like golf is another great example of this, the feels versus the reals. Like it might feel like your hands are way away from you, or you're laid off massively, and you can then bring yourself back on the ideal path to hit the ball. And until you've felt those, if you're not able to get into those positions, you can't make the correction. And it applies across all movements.
Yeah. All sports. Cool. It's a crazy thing. I think we spent, and I think we might be taught anatomically to, like, with so much focus around neutral, and then neutral became being stable, And then movement even is misconstrued in a way where we need that stability and to control, and everything's really around a fixed center point, without ever actually paying attention to where someone's own perception of that center point is, and realizing that they're offset, but training them like they're here.
Yeah.
There's so much more to it. So our real potential is like this, but the bubble that we operate in is actually like this. Whether you're the gym bro we talked about in that section, or a NFL athlete, or a little old lady, who I always use a story of whose only goal when asked what her goal was to be able to reach the top shelf and get the gin. Right? Yeah, we've got to satisfy that need.
Yeah.
All operating in bubbles less than their potential.
Yeah.
Through an inability to, the binary cross and check of your movements are you can do half of them and half of them you can't. Your foot pressures, where you're loading up in one quadrant of your foot rather than all four. Your ability to move a spine in all segments versus one small chunk. And so many other things we've actually talked about here, all add up to that very point of I can be super stable and balanced here with a zero effort, optimal efficiency, optimal energy conservation, because I know all of this, which 3 dimensions of movement, know how my joints move, know how they communicate with each other, know how to get from one leg to the other. And then I'm in a space where I can go and do whatever the hell I want without thinking about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the beauty of what movement gives us.
Totally. Love it. I think we both, I don't want to speak for you, but we both probably love the philosophical side of things, like the high level principles, but I'm aware that a lot of listeners will want practical takeaways. So if we want to create that bigger comfort zone of movement around the center piece, the center point movement, what advice could you give somebody to do so?
First thing that comes to mind, what about exploring a foot clock? You know what I mean by that?
Yeah.
So,
but maybe explain it for the listeners.
I will, yeah. Maybe we can chuck a video in or something. So, where to start? Single leg balance used to be for me, can I stand on one leg, on the foot, and keep myself still and try, right? Then there was go on a wobble board and move around like this and try and keep this still. And the reality is that this is actually still. The ground is still, and we need to oscillate and wobble on it. The better we are at doing that, the more stable we are. That's experiencing the extremes to become this. So then there was an idea that, for me anyway, is that instead of trying to be stable, standing still on one leg, can I explore that circle? So now my right foot is in the center of that circle, and I'm going to take my left foot and I'm going to reach it to all the different clock points. I'm going to take my left foot and toe tap at number 12. What's important in this, because I see this a lot on the internet. I don't know how it kind of got rolling, but most people are like, don't let your foot move. Reach as far as you can, keep your pelvis level, keep the ribs square, and like, what am I doing? I'm now just adducting, abducting, extending and flexing my hip without any allowance of relational movement in everything else. So I don't know where it got lost in the conversation, but if you stand on that foot and you reach to 12 o'clock, it's going to create a movement in the foot, it's going to create a flexion in the knee, flexion in the hip, and hopefully an extension in the spine. And if I come to 11 o'clock with my left foot, 10 o'clock, and these are going to pull my foot into this position, they're going to draw my knee to the inside. That's probably the reason why they go, don't let anything move, because we don't want your knee to go inside because it's bad, and pronation is evil, right? So you just wasted 5 minutes of your guy's life. Anyway, out to 3 o'clock, turn the foot out to 4 o'clock, turn it out to 5 o'clock, straight back to 6 o'clock. You've gone through this whole process of hiking the pelvis, rotating the pelvis, tilting the pelvis, and we can come to 5 o'clock and 4 o'clock where you're rotating and hiking the pelvis, and I'm exploring this boundary with my toe touch. Incidentally, if you put weight on the left, so I take my left foot out to 3 o'clock and put weight on that, because I increase the base of support from my right foot to the contact point out here, my mass will move towards it. I don't want that. So this is like a toe touch, what I call a kiss. And that will keep your mass inside your feet. So you're managing your whole mass on this point, but creating movement in your pelvis. So you'll start to explore and feel that you're actually taking your pelvis through movements that it should naturally take in the gait cycle. More than that, you're loading, with an anterior tilt, you're loading proximal hamstrings and glutes. With the drop of the pelvis, you're loading your abductors. As you bring the rotation in, you're creating external rotation and internal rotation of a hip. So there's this huge exploration going on. And by you exploring out here, you're creating movement in here. And the crazy thing is at the end, you can go back to standing on the one leg, and you'll realise that it's more effortless. That's where I came up with the word, and more efficient. And then now I'm not wobbling around and trying so hard, I'm conserving energy. And that's a really basic experience that you can put yourself through to explore that.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that can be applied to all movements. You can apply it to squatting and reaching in all different directions.
Anything,
absolutely.
A dumbbell on a bench up here. So there's so much. Like, the more you understand about mechanics, the more freedom and play you can put into your movement, so you're less stuck in that. We used to complain, didn't we, that the machines were holding us in a groove, and the free weights would give us freedom. But when you really think about that freedom and exploring different ranges like this, what that actually means. So even the freedom developed from a free weight can be expanded upon if you understand the anatomical connotations.
Totally. I think, I don't want to be a golf nose, but I am.
You are.
So I can't deny it. But the example that comes to mind for me is, people always talk, I think Sevi Ballesteros, his parents just gave him a 7-iron. So he was forced to play every single type of shot. And you see this in kids in all sports anyway, that they're just so much more willing to experiment and play around and try crazy stuff. And it actually dials in the basic stuff. So he would be, opening his club face excessively, like crazy amounts of open club face, closed club face, and you figure out what that does.
To make it go further or higher.
Exactly. And that means that his stock standard straight shot becomes way more efficient because he's experienced those extremes and he can bring it back to center. Whereas if he only ever tried, this is the adult golfer picking it up late, they only ever try to hit it dead straight. And they haven't experienced those extremes, even just looking at club face, but there's obviously so many other components to a golf swing that they find it way harder to learn the basic swing.
There's so many. First of all, I thought both of mine were tennis actually, but from a tennis coach, he had a frustrated kid who was unable to he just kept hitting the net with his serve. And so Mike, who'd done my course, in fact I've worked with him on and off over the years, he said to the guy, just smash it into the net as hard as you can. So forced him to hit it low 10 times. And then he said, I want you to hit the back wall, hit it 10 times, and then I just do your serve, and it was back to the perfect. He just found his middle groove. And the other one I like is Andre Agassi's book. Have you read that one?
I have, yeah.
So you probably know what I'm going to say, but he is facing the dragon that his dad put him out in front of this machine over and over again, relentless, hitting these balls back from the serve. And years later became tennis world number one, and went back home and turned the dragon on, and it was too fast for him as the world number one. But as a kid, he was able to tolerate that. But what that meant for him, just crazy.
That's amazing. Yeah, you do it too much, and then normal feels easy.
Yeah.
That's really cool. That actually just triggered a memory. Matthew Said, who's a table tennis pro, tells a story in his book Bounce about one guy on tour who was famous for his fast reactions, and it turned out that he grew up playing table tennis in a shed, so he didn't have space to step back from the table to then have more time to read the ball. So because all of his early table tennis was in this constrained environment, he was forced to read his opponent better than other people who had more time to read the ball. And he had this sixth sense of just getting back. Somebody would be hitting a smash and he'd be there and hit a great return because his subconscious mind had just learnt to play at overspeed.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And that principle, I think, can be applied to everything. Is that what's the quality you want? Push it a bit too far, and then you bring it back, and it feels easy.
Yeah, I always used to make sure the kids were doing maths at a level above what they were doing at school.
Yeah, same thing.
No problem.
Yeah,
if they understand that, then they can learn the stuff at school really easy, less of a challenge, and still be ahead of the game. I think there's probably so many examples of that in life, and people may or may not be aware of it, but the business is called Anatomy in Motion, but the website's called Finding Centre, and the courses were called Finding Centre, and Finding Centre is not a conscious approach. It's an unconscious approach that happens by pushing the extremes, taking your joints to extremes. Now, when we say extremes, we don't mean necessarily taking a hip to full flexion and full extension. We mean its maximal flexion at the same time as the knee is experiencing its maximal flexion, at the same time as the foot is experiencing a full pronation on 3 points of contact, which contains the amount of flexion you can get. So it's not a huge, but they're speaking to each other. But the general idea is that if I explore all the way left, all the way right, all the way forward, all the way backwards, and rotation in both ways, I'll come back to rest in a centered position. And that happens because you're inviting the body to explore all of the avenues and opportunities, and then it goes, if I get that task applied to me again, the best place for me to start is in center. Not with all my weight in my left heel. Yeah? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so, oh wow, when I walk, you actually want me to put weight on my right foot? Okay, I better start in the middle.
Yeah.
Because otherwise I can't get over there. I don't have time. It's 0.7 seconds to get through a footstep.
Yeah.
I don't have time to get right if I start left. So, but then you can't say to someone, hold yourself in the middle and go for a walk, because they can't do that, because they don't know what that is. So it has to be that unconscious space. So finding center is you're inviting the body to explore all of its possibilities to re-find where it wants to start from. And we do that by pushing boundaries. And these little anecdotes and stories are examples of that, almost forcing someone to improve.
Love it.
But with little tricks.
Yeah.
Or under the radar. Just reach your hand here.
Yeah.
Put your foot on this wedge. And you're doing it with an intention, positive intention and a good purpose, and knowing that it will create a reaction because you're putting back something, breaking a habit, violating a pattern, putting something back into a person's movement that they've not had before.
Yeah.
And think they just reorganize.
Exactly. It's that experience. I think that's the common theme, is that they've experienced it. And so much normal training lacks that experience of a new position, a new range of motion.
Yeah. Fixed grooves, fixed ideas, fixed minds.
Exactly.
Fixed research papers. Yeah. Lack of evolution, progress, thinking, free thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's all there.
It is.
Yeah.
We're running out of time again, so I want to finish with
I dread to think where we'd be in 2 hours' time. By
exactly.
the way. Yeah.
I want to finish with a fun one that we spoke about a while ago at lunch with your friend Mike and Kai, and the question was, or the notion was raised, that surfing is the most difficult sport.
Yes. It was an awkward conversation.
Yeah. But I think it's a fascinating conversation about what makes a sport difficult, and how do you compare and contrast such wildly different sports. Because I think Kai was pushing forward gymnastics because it's so multidisciplinary and requires so many challenging movement abilities from the same individual. What's your knee-jerk response and thought process around this?
I generally stayed quiet, I think, at the table at the time. Surfing is bloody hard. That's a fact. The magic about all of this is a good surfer makes it look easy. Finding yourself in the water at the right space and the right time is an art. And actually, if you get stood up on the board, I don't think that's not the hard part.
Yeah.
Getting to surf it seems like the impossible bit.
Yeah.
But obviously, when you're on a board and you get better and better, you raise the stakes, the bigger waves, etc., etc. I have utter admiration for anyone who does that. We've met some lads called the Smith brothers here. You can check them out on Instagram, but they Jake is probably 19 now, and his brothers are younger than him. They're all surfing Nazare. It's crazy.
Biggest waves in the world.
The biggest waves in the world. Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. I think, yeah, gymnastics is hard, but I don't know if you'd ask Kai that question, David, if he'd say the same, because he's realising that the more he trains himself for finger strength, one-arm pull-ups, calisthenics movements, the easier those kind of, that gymnastic-y side of rock climbing kind of gets for him. Anything out of reach, so as a climber you get to a point where I can climb everything in the gym below a certain level and nothing above it, and that's it. It's really hard to then break through those plateaus, so that also adds difficulty. My knee-jerk reaction is went to watch the baseball. And I think I was a bit like cricket. You see, you get the ball, hit the ball, play a defensive shot, and you'll hit the wayward one. But in baseball, you walk out, you have 3 goes, and you walk back in again. Yeah. You don't hit anything. And I was at the speed that it's coming out, the size of the bat. Whenever they connect with it and it goes straight to a guy, they throw it to first base, you're out. It blew my mind how complex that actual task is.
Yeah.
And then when we were at a facility and they just put the baseball on a tee, which is up at like nipple height, trying to hit that thing was also impossible, and you got to do it coming at you at 100 mile an hour or whatever they bloody do. So that in itself it actually blew my mind how hard and how disadvantaged the batter is to the rest of the field, which doesn't feel the same as cricket for me. So massively put it into a context for that. I was watching it with Kai, was with me, and we did have the conversation about the gymnastics and the surfing or baseball. But I think all sports are hard.
Yep.
I think all sports are hard. When you watch people try and get into a sport, a bit like you said about the kids, the younger you do it, the easier it gets.
Yeah.
Skiing, like try to pick up skiing. I don't even think about skiing. It's just so effortless for me to ski because I did it for so long. But you put an adult on a pair of skis, and they've got so much to overcome: the fear of falling, the downhill, what am I supposed to do with these long planks on my feet? Crazy. I think all sports deserve respect. And the last time I tried to hit a treble 20
on
a dartboard, so I don't know, all sports garner respect, and the thing that makes people is the practice. Hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard.
Absolutely.
That's what.
But I think I'm going to push you, because there's no right or wrong in this question. It's always going to be an opinion. And I think your opinion has to come from what you think makes a sport difficult. And maybe I'll chuck mine out without too much explanation, but my 2 that compete would be mixed martial arts and golf. And mixed martial arts is because, similar to the baseball thing, you're against somebody and they're doing everything they can to stop you doing what you want to do.
Yeah.
And in golf, it's because it's the most intricate with the most variables. So similar to surfing, you have to read the weather, you have to read the greens, you have to read the grass even. And the thing you're trying to do, like darts, is incredibly precise. You're hitting a very small ball with a small club head miles away into a small hole. So it just has so many layers to it. Yeah. And for me, those 2 jump out as the most difficult sports for those reasons. But it's always opinion, not fact. In your opinion, if you had to pick 1 or 2?
Well, the hardest sports are the ones I can't do.
Yeah.
I can't do golf consistently, but I can do golf.
Yeah.
You saw me hit over that.
Yeah,
ledge.
you've got a nice swing.
Yeah, right. I can rock climb. I can do hard grades, but not above that. But that doesn't take my satisfaction or joy away from it. And I can climb stuff that other people in the gym can't, and always feel kind of satisfied around that. But I can't surf, which has to like put it all the way up there for me.
Yeah.
I used to do gymnastics. That was fine. Swimming, no problem. Hit golf balls. Couldn't hit that baseball. That's hard. So I think because most of my life I picked up sports, which maybe that just means good hand-eye coordination, good body awareness, good kinesthetic self-perception, which is ultimately what led me to be able to stand in a dark room and figure stuff out. I didn't have to be told. So I have really good body self-awareness. So I always think I'll be able to pick up most sports. So the idea of them being hard is never really, I've never really thought, oh, sports are hard. So I'm finding that, I think that's why I stayed out of that question. But I agree, surfing is not just that, but I was significantly going to get hurt the more I tried. So I just thought, I'm too old for this.
Yeah.
I just don't want to have time out because of some idiot cruising into the back of me. But I'd try and hit a baseball all day long, right? And then maybe I could eventually get it. But it's not on my agenda.
Yeah, I'm sure you could. I think the other component that comes into mind with surfing is it's so hard to get a lot of reps. In all those other sports,
as a beginner, you don't get any.
Exactly.
You don't get any reps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're not even able to get the opportunity to learn, then it's always going to be a shallower learning.
You get down to the flow rider, but even then, when you go into the ocean, you're not gonna. Like, where's my weight on a plate? You know, it's not. Yeah. Mad question.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah.
But thank you. That's a lot of food for thought. And yeah, we're up on time again. So I just want to say thank you very much. There's another brilliant conversation.
I'm blown away how long we've been chatting.
Yeah.
But thoroughly enjoyed it. And I think, testament to the questions and the conversation we're able to have to keep it hopefully interesting for people.
Thank you if you've made it this far.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And there's probably more to come.
Hope so.
I don't know, but I love exploring all those avenues and how we go from like this is like a structured conversation around joint mechanics to the non-tangible side of anatomy that is probably the bigger thing we should be focusing on. So hopefully we've got a flavour of that.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely love it. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you, buddy.
Awesome. If you are still with us and you've made it through the episode in one sitting, then I take my hat off to you. That was a long shift, and hopefully it was well worth your time. So many nuggets from Gary there, and I think it's just always so informative to hear someone's opinion when they've been in the industry that long, as it's not just pure knowledge, it's based on a lot of experience too. I'll add the links to Gary's website and socials in the description below. I highly recommend checking them out and learning from him. I think of it as almost the source code of human movement. Everything else layers on top of it. But that's it for this week, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comments below. But otherwise, take care, and we look forward to seeing you next week.